City of Northglenn, Channel 8, keeping you informed of events in your community.
Council study session. I'd like to call the meeting to order. And Joanna, would you call the roll, please?
Mayor Dodge?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Escobar?
Here.
Councilmember Sowers?
Here.
Councilmember Leidy? Here. Councilmember Downing? Here. Councilmember Brown?
Here.
Councilmember Whitman?
Here.
Councilmember Duran-Mullica will be absent. Councilmember Wilford? Here.
So the first item tonight is our Adams County Poverty Reduction and Neighborhood Outreach Team. I'm sure you all introduced yourselves and just get started. We have a heavy agenda tonight, so yeah.
In that case, it's great to be first on the agenda.
Yes.
On a heavy agenda
Lucky
night.
you.
Yes, exactly. Awesome. We are really thankful that you guys are giving us the opportunity to be here. We'll certainly introduce ourselves shortly, but we are with Adams County. It's always good to be back in Northglenn as a former Northglenn resident and a frequenter of Bad Daddy's Burger. Here we are. So I just kind of wanted to introduce our team and kind of what we're working on and the alignment that we're trying to receive with a lot of the municipalities, go through some of the initiatives and kind of share some stuff with you. So I'm Paulo Diaz. I know quite a few of you from my previous life and other things, but now I work for Adams County. We are in the county manager's office. We are working on the poverty reduction initiative. To my right, your left, is Rebecca Zamora. She is our neighborhood outreach liaison. So in her role, what she is doing is she's working with a lot of our neighborhoods, particularly the low-income neighborhoods, and trying to increase their capacity, as well as our nonprofit organizations. She staffs our Adams County Foundation, which she'll talk about later through our presentation. And then we have Sam Olsen over here, straight from Michigan. She's from this part of Michigan. She moved here back in September. She is our homelessness outreach liaison. So in her role, she's working with a lot of our nonprofit organizations who are working with homelessness, and she's helping me kind of navigate through the whole housing stuff. So that's kind of what our role is. Oh, I should have shown you my name. Okay, here you go. Not working, unless it's not on. You know what? You have to turn it on first, Heather. Okay. So there's our names. So the first part is kind of how we got to this point. Back in 2017, the Board of County gaps in services. So what services are we providing? Where are the gaps? Who can fill those gaps? And how can we fill those gaps? And if not, then what can we as a county do about it? So through the study, the Burns Center made 13 recommendations, which included short-term recommendations and long-term recommendations. And those are some things that we are certainly sorting through as we speak. So I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca to talk about some demographics in Adams County, and then we'll dive back into our goals.
So Adams County's current population is 500,000 and growing, with exponential growth projected for 2040. Our poverty rate is right now around 12%, which means about 60,000 of our residents currently are experiencing poverty, which correlates with a lot of our human service data, which is demonstrating that around 59 to 60,000 people are receiving some kind of benefit from our human services agencies. Overall, 20,000 residents currently are unemployed, and while the median household is around $66,000, our average wage is steady at about $55,000, which is indicative of what kind of opportunities are available to our residents. Our Adams County as a whole is the workforce capital of the metro area. In our population have the doctors, the teachers, and all of the different employees that are around the metro area, and some of our largest employers are hospitals and UPS and other more workforce style employment. There's approximately 57% of our residents have or earn $50,000 or less, and we are a family-oriented county with our largest populations being 39% are two married households with children, and 34% single households with families. Housing, 66% of our residents own their homes, 33% rent. There's over 160,000 households in Adams County. The average rent is around $1,500 a month for a two-bedroom apartment, and we all know that those rates are actually steadily climbing. The eviction rate is around 4.4%. That is well above the average of Colorado of 2.75%. And currently, you need at least 2.7 full-time jobs to do. At any one given time. Go over to our kiddos. So currently in Adams County, there's over 133,000 future workforce kiddos that are currently being taught in our Adams County schools. National data has demonstrated that if our children are not reading by third grade, then they're 4 times less likely not to graduate from high school. But if you add poverty to the mix, it's 13 times less likely not to be able to graduate from high school. Currently, 32% of our kiddos are exceeding or meeting expectation. 19% of them, however, are free or reduced lunch. So just to kind of demonstrate the risk factors here, for 8th grade reading, 29% are exceeding expectations in mathematics, but only 14% of that number are in free and reduced lunch. High school graduation, 75% is currently 75. 68% of those kiddos are in free and reduced lunch. Overall, the free and reduced lunch rates in Adams County are at 49%. With that, we have some goals that we'd like to talk to you about for our team.
So as far as the goals with the poverty reduction team, we recently all met with the county manager's office to really kind of start breaking down what it is that we're trying to accomplish with regards to reducing poverty. So through that, we were able to identify 5 goals. One is to increase access, by the way, this is in no particular order. One is to increase access to affordable housing. So we can talk a little bit about some of the housing initiatives in just a little bit. Another one is to improve community health. In fact, just this morning, the 3 of us met with representatives from Tri-County Health Department to go over their public health improvement plan. And so we are trying to make sure that we are in alignment with regards to making sure that in Adams County, we are working to improve the community's health. Our third goal is to increase access and accommodations towards education and skill development. So Rebecca gave you statistics just a little bit ago with regards to education, but we also kind of wanted to focus on adults and making sure that there are some opportunities that they are receiving to help develop their skills. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. Aligning community resources, services, and programs, we'll definitely dive into that as we go along. And then building sustainable financial security to make sure that as we are launching these programs, they are programs that can certainly be sustainable for years to come. So diving into really what we're focusing on right now, the first focus is we are having discussions with community leaders around issues of poverty and homelessness. So we have certainly some examples of that back in, gosh, was it September or October at this point? We hosted a tour of the tiny home village, the beloved community village, and we had 23 community leaders there. So that included elected officials from, I think, 5 different municipalities, plus the county, as well as some staff members. So I know we had a city attorney who was also able to attend. So I know City of Northglenn Councilmember Jenny Wilford was there, so thank you for being there. Westminster was also represented, as was Thornton, as was Commerce City. Brighton, the representative, had a last-minute change, family emergency that they weren't able to attend. And as I mentioned, Adams County was there with the county commissioners. And what we really wanted to do there was we wanted to take a look at how is Beloved Community Village operating? Is this a system that we would want to bring into Adams County? And really just to kind of start that dialogue. And so those are some things that we are exploring, and just to kind of expose the community leaders on that to see if it's something that they want to bring up to their communities or how we want to approach it as a county. Just as an update where we're at, we're taking some Adams County staff members there in a couple weeks just to kind of in our community and economic development, our facilities and fleet, so we can start bringing together all of our minds to see what kind of proposal we want to bring together to the county commissioners to see if that's something that we want to bring in Adams County. We also had a symposium in early December to discuss poverty. So we had 4 different breakout sessions with that, children and families, health, workforce, and housing. And so thankfully, we had 4 members from Northglenn staff who attended, one sitting in the back, Becky Smith, thank you for attending. So I know that Northglenn was well represented there. So we appreciate your support on that. We had close to 100 individuals who were able to attend that to really start the discussion on what poverty looks like in the county, as well as for people to start thinking that they are part of the solution and it's not just a single entity's problem to solve. Part of the ways that we are having discussions with community leaders is nights like tonight, where we are standing in front, or sitting in front of you guys to talk about what we are doing and helping you guys kind of study the issue. We're also meeting with Thornton City Council in early February. Commerce City, we're also talking to. They want to put us on the calendar soon. So these are dialogues that we are hoping to have. And one of the things that we are looking to do right now, too, is we are looking to form a few different committees. As we develop these initiatives, we want to run these initiatives by the committees to help us figure out if it's the right thing to do, what are some ways to explore it, how we can get community buy-in, if that's the route that we want to go. Because we know that we're not the experts, we are just the conveners. So one of the groups that we are looking to have is an executive leadership committee in which we are planning to bring together leaders from municipalities, from the business community, from nonprofit organizations to start having that dialogue. I know Rebecca is going to oversee a committee working with nonprofits specifically to start bringing nonprofit groups together. And Sam has been working with the Adams County Municipal Homelessness Work Group, which I know we have a Northglenn staff member there, Kathy is there, and to go over homelessness specific issues. So we want to make sure that we are convening these individuals to get to our next point to help us develop a strategic plan. As we are diving through these initiatives, we want to make sure that we are having the voices of the individuals who can help us basically carry these plans along. And so we want to make sure that we have community input. So that's one of the things that we are pursuing. The third bullet point is we are trying to align with municipalities and nonprofits. I know Sam has been working with a lot of the homelessness nonprofit organizations, trying to figure out how we can get into alignment, because oftentimes they're competing for the same dollars. So are there some nonprofits who are doing things better than other nonprofits in which they can put a little bit more focus on that, and other nonprofits can do what they're best at. As I mentioned earlier, and she can talk about this later, Rebecca is working with other nonprofit organizations through the Adams County Foundation. So we're definitely working a lot with the nonprofits as well as municipalities like you guys. As I mentioned, we are planning to hold meetings with a lot of the municipalities such as you guys to talk about some of the initiatives we're looking at. Some of that's not included on here is a lot of the phone calls that I know that you guys are getting has to do with individuals who need help, who are on the streets. What do we do with them? And so we're trying to create more of a community integrated response. I know Thornton has a program that they've been kind of working on, and so how can we make that countywide, as well as a program called the Community Response Team that they've developed down in Douglas County. And so, for example, we are planning to bring in those Douglas County individuals to share information about their program. And the whole premise of that is oftentimes AdCom gets these great phone calls. And we just send our police officers and firefighters because that's just what we do. But oftentimes the best way to support them is to send over a mental health team who can then meet with them, do a mental health assessment, and provide them with the services that they need, as opposed to sending over a firefighter and a police officer who's not necessarily trained in social work or mental health assessment. So that's definitely a program that we are looking at. And we'd like to bring to you guys, hopefully at some point, if that's a direction that we all decide to move in. Another program that we're exploring is a program that's worked in LA as well as Santa Barbara, called Safe Spot Parking. And so the whole premise behind that is homelessness is not just individuals who are camped in encampments. We also have individuals who are living out of their cars with their family members. And so providing them with a safe parking space for them to be able to park in and maybe even get some support from law enforcement officials who are driving by, making sure that they're okay. And so identifying different parking places throughout the county where we can have our outreach. Our police officers can tell them, hey, if you're looking for a place to stay, we have this parking lot over here in this part of town or this part of town, whatever makes the most sense for you. So that's another initiative that we are trying to take a look at. Sam has been working on the PIT count, the point in time count. I think that's taken up most of her time the last 3 months, right, Sam? Yep. So what that is it's required by HUD, but the bottom line is we're from a 24-hour period from dawn on Monday, January 28th through dawn of January 29th, a Tuesday. It's counting how many homeless individuals we have in Adams County, whether they're in shelters, whether they're unsheltered. So a lot of that has revolved around creating magnet events, soliciting donations for those magnet events, as well as just community outreach to let those who are experiencing homelessness know that there are events going on where we have some stuff to donate to you, but we want to do a quick survey so we can get a feel for how many homeless individuals do we have in the county. So what are our needs in terms of getting HUD federal funding. We're also working with Bayard Enterprises right now to develop jobs for those who are experiencing homelessness. This is a program that they're doing right now in Denver called Denver Day Works. And so what that looks like is a nonprofit organization such as Bayard Enterprises would be going to an encampment on a specific day, specific days during the week. We would have a homeless individual or a group of homeless individuals basically be picked up in a van and taken to do a service job, whether that's partnering with a Parks and Rec department in Adams County or with Northglenn or with Thornton or Commerce City, whatever that might be. If there was a job to do, we could send them there and they would get paid same day as cash. So that is a program that we are looking at as a way to help develop their skills to make sure that they are starting to build their capacity, their internal capacity. And then the last program that I'll mention before Sam kind of dives into the other areas of focus is the legal aid services, which we really thank you guys for supporting. If you recall, that is to help prevent evictions, the legal aid program with Colorado Legal Services. So happy to report that thanks to your support, that program actually opened today. So they will be in the courthouse on Mondays from 8 to 5. They're still solidifying what times that they will be at the Irving Street Library in Westminster. They're finalizing that, but they're looking at being at the Irving Street Library on Mondays, as well as Wednesday afternoons. But thank you to you guys for your support in partnership with the other municipalities. That program will support individuals who are facing eviction for the next 2 years. Sam, do you want to talk about housing?
Yeah, so a big part of what I'm going to be working on is this continuum of housing. So people experiencing homelessness, they face a lot of other challenges. People who are living in their cars or just of low income, they're still vulnerable with finding secure, affordable housing. So the idea with a spectrum or a continuum of housing, we're looking at projects of sanctioned encampments. So then people who are living in camps have a designated safe place to camp. Similar, the safe spot parking that Paulo had talked about a little bit is similar, but with people living in their cars. So those would be opportunities that people would be able to stay somewhere safe, and we could also know where people are, because that's another challenge that we're seeing in outreach. We may know where someone is now, but encampments and people living in their cars, they can move and the locations change day to day. Another idea that we are looking into, and we have another tour coming up, is the tiny home villages. So we are definitely interested in seeing who's interested in helping us create tiny home villages, whether that's one centralized location or maybe scattered sites throughout the county. So we're going to be reaching out to different municipalities, trying to see what that actually looks like. We've been working with Beloved Community Village in Denver, and we've been working with them, trying to learn a little bit more of the production or implementation of tiny villages. Another thing, so thinking about the spectrum, is looking into programs such as rapid rehousing. So someone who is encountering homelessness, that they can quickly get into housing, having that permanent supportive housing, also to get them sheltered, but also connected to continual services and support. In the same idea of housing, we can also, we're also interested in looking at renters' rights, ways to prevent displacement. I know there are some areas in the county that there is some hesitation of what the areas might look like with opportunity zones, so trying to prevent any type of displacement or gentrification that might cause displacement, trying to look at that and combat it at a proactive way. We're also reviewing the Adams County Housing Balance Plan and following through with ideas such as accessory dwelling units, and also looking into housing trust funds. And lastly, to end the continuum of housing, there's always the idea or the opportunity for home ownership. So providing more resources and services for people who are wanting to eventually own their home is definitely something that we want to look into. So with all that said, I'm currently working with 4 shelters, nonprofits in Adams County. We're talking about what services are provided, are there services that are duplicated, and how do we reduce duplicated resources and services, really trying to implement housing first model. So basically allowing people to stay in your shelter with very low barriers, so no background checks, no drug testing. So really trying to implement those best practices as much as possible in our shelters. Another best practice that we're interested in looking into is a coordinated entry system. So if someone encounters someone experiencing homelessness, they can get into the system and we can kind of track where they are, kind of look into their vulnerability scale, and then get them to whatever housing solution best fits for them. So that would also help with streamlining a wait list, so then nonprofits can speak to one another and make sure that they're, if one person is in contact with multiple organizations, that we're all kind of aware and know that they're wanting help. Let's see. And lastly, just continuing our coordination with already established groups. As Paulo mentioned, there is a municipal work group that we meet on a monthly basis. Another monthly meeting that we have is the Adams County Coalition for the Homeless. They have been meeting on a regular basis, mostly to train and learn more about best practices. However, we are hoping to transition a little bit more so that it could be a little bit more action focused. What programs does the group actually want to see? How can they communicate to the county manager's office to implement policy changes or program ideas, that type of stuff. And so with housing in mind, there is as Paulo had mentioned, the partnership with Fayad to see how they are implementing their workforce programs, a program for people experiencing homelessness and also people who may have a disability. And so in addition to workforce, we are also interested in working with Fayad and learning about their mobile services of laundry and showers. In the same realm of trying to create services and bring them to where people are, whether it's in their cars or at the encampments. We're also looking at expanding outreach services. We're working with Tri-County to potentially expand their outreach and health screenings on the trails as well. Let's see. Another thing that we want to expand and bring to the trails or camps is working with our Human Services Department and trying to get the different benefits that are provided at the Human Services Center out into the field as well, so people are maybe more easily signed up for whatever benefits that there might be. We're also looking at storage units, mobile clinics, other job resources, so trying to be as mobile as possible, especially for people who are hard to reach or with the lack of access to transportation, trying to bridge that gap a little bit. Lastly, we are supporting North Metro Chamber of Commerce and their Center for Innovation, so they are working on that, but more importantly, we are going to work with them and help them target low-income individuals and families while they push that forward. But now, Rebecca will talk a little bit more about the Adams County Foundation.
So we all know that when we're combating poverty, some of our first responders are nonprofit organizations, and we all know that our nonprofits are reaching capacity at every turn. There's more need than there are resources, and so the Adams County Foundation was created by the Board of County Commissioners, and it is a 7-member board of residents who come together. This past year, we gave out $880,000 of capacity and innovation grants to the local nonprofits who are doing this very important work. Around $450,000 of those dollars directly impact your Northglenn residents. But overall in Adams County, we're seeing a great impact in terms of our funding that went to things like grants for low-income adults. At Front Range Community College, we see a lot of children's services, medical care, detox care, all kinds of different things that are very, very beneficial for and very, very needed for our residents, and also do great work at combating poverty. We believe that our mission is to provide equitable opportunities for all. Our tagline is "We do better together," and we look forward to continue bringing all of the work that we're doing at the foundation to the different municipalities, so that you can continue seeing some of the work that's going on there, but also help us find the nonprofits that are doing the great work, and help us spread the word to all of the different local nonprofits. Because as you know, there's a lot of nonprofits out there that don't always apply for grants, or maybe they just think they're too small, but there's always a place at the table at the Adams County Foundation. Another thing that we're doing on the neighborhood side is creating a neighborhood toolkit. We know that all the municipalities has done an excellent job at creating your own toolkit, but what we're doing is we're bolstering a county-wide initiative to, number one, make sure that everybody knows what your toolkit is and what you offer, but then also providing additional services. So in case your party trailers or your toolkits are kind of full, we're working with the Anything libraries to create sharing sheds that have additional free resources to the community. So if they want to have a pop-up community event, there'll be tables and chairs and movie equipment and all different kinds of things that they can get for free at the library as well. So it just is an expansion on all of the good work that you're already doing, and we're hoping to launch that in 2019 in the spring. We just want to take a moment to thank you again for having us today, for listening to some of the things that we're doing. We look forward to partnering with you and working with you alongside you as we continue to tackle poverty reduction. And the future looks bright. I think it's going to be there's some wonderful things ahead. And again, just like the Adams County Foundation says, we do better together. So it's going to be really great moving forward. So thank you.
So as you can see, we're kind of just starting to scratch the surface as far as what we are really trying to tackle, because a lot of that is really working with residents, municipalities, nonprofit organizations, businesses, which is why we want to continue these discussions and dialogues. So before I ask if you guys have any questions, I also want to thank Heather Geyer. I know that she has been very responsive and very supportive as we have tried to push things forward and inquired and asked questions. And so thank you, Heather, for all of your support. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
So what questions do you guys have for us, or ideas or thoughts?
Questions? I want to make a comment.
Sure.
So I really appreciate how much funding Adams County is putting into all of this because I've been on council a long time now, and in the past, I've gotten way too intimately involved in a few cases with homeless people, homeless families, and I was, grasping at straws, looking for the nonprofit friends that I had, and typically there was always somebody who would, take the case and move on, but it's very difficult. It was very difficult to navigate, and I really appreciate that Adams County is putting together this integration of services where we can actually go now and maybe get more help than just trying to go it alone. So I just want to say thank you very much for the work.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. And yeah, to that point, just so you guys understand exactly what a big priority this is for Adams County, if you look at the county manager's office, we have our legislative guy, we have 2 management analysts, and then you have the poverty reduction team. So essentially, that's really the only team that he has within the county manager's office. So this is a team that he's really focusing on to make sure that we really are trying to address poverty reduction and really start to work with the cities in accomplishing that. So thank you, Mayor.
Tell Mr. Gonzalez he's doing a great job.
That'd be out of character for me, so.
Yeah. Are there anyone
Perfect,
else
thank you.
comments or questions? Jenny?
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, I just want to say thank you all so much for coming and sharing everything that you're doing with us tonight. I have only been on council for a year, but this is really exciting to hear the direction that the county is going and all of the investment, both in time and energy that's being put into tackling some of these larger countywide issues. So thank you for being here. I'm really intrigued by the safe spot parking initiative, and so I hope that as you all move forward in exploring that idea, that perhaps you can come back and have a conversation with us about that, because I think it could be a really great initiative and a great way to serve some of those individuals experiencing homelessness that are living in and out of their cars. To get some of the access to services that they need, but also have a safe place to sleep at night. So thank you for bringing that to us, and also thank you for acknowledging that homelessness is more than just some of the encampments that we're seeing, some of the individuals asking for money on the side of the street, that there are a lot of faces to homelessness, and I think that that's a really powerful point, because at the end of the day, most of us, if not in this room, most of our residents are one paycheck away, one medical bill, one job loss away from experiencing homelessness. So I think it's all very close, and I appreciate the work that you're doing.
Great, thank you. And yeah, so the blessing that I would like to receive from you guys tonight is definitely, as we continue to move forward, we definitely love to continue communicating with your staff on initiatives that we are working on, to see if there is some interest from on your end to pursue that, as well as to present to you guys as well. So perfect, thank you, Councilwoman.
Any further comments?
Thank you. In reference to the tiny home village, so you mentioned that obviously you attended that, which is really awesome to have Northglenn represented. You mentioned there's going to be another one. Is that open, or is that more of just internal Adams County staff, or? Yeah,
so currently it's scheduled for Adams County staff only, just because the lens that we are taking a look at it is we want to start looking at what information do we need to make a proposal to the Board of County Commissioners. So that being said, if there is interest within your council members or your staff to also take a look at that, it's always an open invitation, so just let me know and I'll be happy to send you along the information.
Awesome, and then based off that, you're going to take it to the county commissioners and then open it up for a conversation within surrounding municipalities around the issue?
That's definitely something that we love to do. I think it's hard for us to really start talking to municipalities. I mean, I've been on your side before. It's hard for municipalities to be like, wait, why are they asking us for it? So we as a county, we're trying to take the lead on it, on what do we want to do about tiny home villages in our area, before we start talking to you guys about what that could potentially look like for your areas, and if that's something that you guys want to pursue. So we definitely want to look at it on our end too, being sensitive to the fact that we want to make sure we're leading the way.
Yeah, then you guys can just on that, that'd be wonderful.
Will do. Thank you. Yes.
Quick question. When you do your point in time, do you have a plan to reach out to high schools and make sure that you're counting the teens?
Sam, would you like to address that?
Yeah, so I've been reaching out to the different school districts. Each school district has a McKinney-Vento homeless liaison, so I have been trying to reach out to them, making sure that they are aware of it. Also been working really closely with MPHI, that's Metro Denver Homeless Initiative, and so they're also working with school districts and the homeless liaisons to make sure that they're aware. it's a little tricky with McKinney-Vento with certain like privacy laws that we can't survey on school property, and so that has been something that we're still trying to figure out, but definitely working with the homeless liaisons to let them know that that's a thing. We are going to have a phone line that our partners will know about, and so that is also a resource for people. If they know of someone, they can at least give the number to it, or maybe after school hours. So there's some options in there, but yeah, trying to be as communicative as possible, and trying to work with what we can in kind of a short amount of time, because we do have just a few more weeks to figure all the last minute details. So
I also want to share that we are also starting to talk to school districts with regards to their homeless students. In fact, later this week, I think it's on Thursday morning, Sam and I will be meeting with the Adams 12's homeless education team to go over what programs they are doing, what are we working on, how can we support the work that they are doing, to make sure that we are creating wraparound services and really trying to support their efforts. There's a lot to this, right? So many different layers. Yep.
So I'm curious, you're working with nonprofits. Is that inclusive of the religious communities? Because I know they definitely have been working on this problem for many years through COVID.
Absolutely, and yes, we actually had more than a handful of the faith-based communities who attended the symposium. We plan to have many of the faith-based communities represented in the group that Rebecca will be leading, the committees, especially because what we've been hearing a lot from the faith-based communities is there's a lot of ways that we want to support them, just tell us how. And so we want to make sure that they're engaged in that dialogue.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Anybody else? Wow, this is an early night for me. Okay.
Really is
This is
early.
great, yeah.
It's not going to be for us.
Yeah, exactly.
Really,
Just-
thank you so much
Yeah.
for coming here and sharing all the updates. We really appreciate just hearing from you, so thank you for the outreach.
Thank you for you guys.
Thank you.
For your time and your service, so I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Have a good one, guys. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we are changing the sequence a little bit tonight. We're moving item E, the quarter 3 2018 work plan update, up to next. So, so that staff doesn't have to stay here all evening.
Thank you, Mayor Dodge, and members of council.
Pull this up here.
So I'm here tonight to present the quarter 3 2018 work plan. So just a couple reminders in terms of why we're talking about Q3 and not Q4 yet. There was a city manager transition back in the summer, so my understanding is there was no Q2 update provided. That was originally scheduled for August 13th. What I did was I went back into the spring packets and tried to grab anything that I thought was relevant and timely and put it into this Q3 presentation. So if I missed something, my apologies, please let me know. But I did go back in to the spring after the Q1 update and did my best to capture everything. So this is a Q3 update as of September 30th. And this was originally scheduled for November 19th. My apologies, we're a little behind on this. I'm a little behind on this. But better late than never, and the Q4 2018 update will be held on February 11th as originally scheduled prior to my arrival. So the work plan purpose, in particular for the benefit of those watching at home and our members of the public in the audience with us this evening, the purpose is really to demonstrate alignment of our activities on a day-to-day basis with the City Council strategic vision. Also to be a reflection of resource allocation within the annual city budget, as well as a method really to track major city projects, operational initiatives, and operational data. Overall data collection quarterly and annually. And then I think it's important to emphasize the the importance of demonstrating value of city services and programs and being good stewards of taxpayer dollars. So our city council strategic goals, there are 6 of them, which consist of upgraded city infrastructure and facilities, fiscally responsible city government, strong competitive businesses, community governance and with civic partnerships, clean and beautiful city, livable neighborhoods, and homes. And within those 6 goals, we have multiple strategic objectives. They're a little bit more lengthy, so I won't necessarily read them all to you. But for example, number 1 is enhance community image. So you'll see how that we've tied these different strategic objectives throughout the PowerPoint presentation and providing updates to you this evening. And there's 8 of those strategic objectives. So the first one that we want to recap is the website redesign. We had a new website designed and launched officially in July of 2018. And that's the front page of our city website, although we now have the 50th anniversary logo on our website, so that was a major accomplishment. Also underway is the branding and logo implementation, and Kim and her team have made some great strides with retiring all of the old logo apparel and sending them, I believe, was it overseas, Kim, is that correct? About the time that I arrived, and we're moving forward with replacement of city signage, as you're aware of, and so pretty much more of the minor implementation items are taken care of, and really focused on signage at this point. Development of a marketing plan was an item originally slated to come forward to council back in the fall. By the end of the year, and based on discussions between Kim and I decided to push this into Q1 of 2019 because of some other priorities that we've had that are more significant to address. So that will be coming back to council. Along with that, we'll bring a social media plan. I really view them as going hand in hand and as not separate, so wanted to make sure staff had adequate time to really put both of them together for your review. In terms of major public facilities, we have the construction work that's underway on Northwest Open Space. As you know, council approved the contract at the October 8th meeting for ECI in the amount of $2.8 million. And construction, all things going as planned, should be completed in late spring. And forgot to mention all of our directors are here. So if you have any specific questions about any of the items, feel free to stop me and we can talk more about them. The Kiwanis outdoor pool bathhouse replacement and splash pad addition also made an award to a contractor on October 8th. And construction is also expected to be completed by late spring. However, Amanda did share with me that this is contingent upon delivery of the new building. So this one may be it's a ballpark late spring. Amanda, did you have anything to add to that?
I would just say we're on target right now. I just can't quite control when they will get it to us on time. So we're assuming at this point that delivery will happen on the schedule that it's supposed to. But once we receive that building, then the rest of the schedule follows out from there and is pretty tight once we receive the building.
The Justice Center, we held a ribbon cutting on September 11th, and the facility officially opened on September 28th. I do have plans to bring back an official project closeout, recapping all the official costs in early 2019. Ralston House is also finished. The staff at Ralston House has already started moving in. A certificate of occupancy was issued as of January 3rd. And local Adams County, I'm sorry, I can't believe I said Jefferson County. That was a slip. First time though, right? First time. Adams County managers, last week we met for lunch and discussed we're gonna set in motion what this public grand opening looks like for January 31st. So you'll be hearing more about that within the next week. And then Justice Center West Park, as you recall during the budget process, we talked about the fact that we don't have any funding currently for construction. So we decided to go ahead and keep the approved concept design as done, and then look for how we can leverage funding. And so Amanda brought back 2 opportunities through GOCO and ADCO through planning grant fund requests at the October 22nd meeting. And so once we hear into later on this year, we'll bring that back if we're able to leverage that funding and go ahead and complete that park design. On the Civic Campus, we allocated funding for the design of the new senior center, rec center, and theater in the 2019 budget. We awarded a contract for architectural design in the fall of 2018 to Barker Rinker CCAT in the amount of $3.6 million. One of the things that I did after having been on board for a couple of months was I restructured the project team. So we do still have the project support of Project 1. What I did was restructured to where Nate Hases, who is one of our engineers who's been very involved with the construction of the Ralston House and the Justice Center, is now working side by side with Eric Enzi, one of our planners, as core project team, along with each director. Amanda Peterson, our Parks and Recreation Cultural Services Director, is a lead on the design of the new facility. And so this is a more collaborative approach to the Civic Campus project. And so as we move forward with each phase, you'll have different members of staff taking more of a leadership role moving forward. Susan Stanton, we engaged her to do a P3 report, and we will be bringing that forward to council within the first quarter of 2019. That's taking a big picture look of what the Civic Campus Master Plan vision was when it was adopted and where the market's at, and then what are some opportunities that we can look at taking advantage of moving forward. The City Hall space assessment, we had a report completed by SEH Architects, and that was in the amount of $40,000. We have $375,000 budgeted in the capital projects budget for improvements in 2019. Now, I'll be bringing the report, and this will be a discussion item to council on January 28th to get your feedback on what we'd like to do moving forward. So nothing's set in stone at this point. The next step is to have a discussion with council, and then we'll decide what that looks like. In terms of government policy, the legislative committee developed a new state legislative issues guide that you've all received. The council, you adopted the legislative policy on November 5th, and we have a rescheduled legislative dinner for February 4th. A couple government policy related items. I think one of the most important things that we do is the development of the city budget. So the 2019 city budget was developed, and we held several study sessions over the course of the summer, and the budget was adopted by City Council on October 22nd. There were some minor changes made to the cash management and investment policy brought forward by the Finance Committee. And then in terms of marijuana, the council referred ballot measure 3E to voters on November 6th to increase the city's special marijuana tax. There were also several changes that were made to our city code to reflect changes made at the statewide level. I won't go into all of this detail, but those activities are outlined in relationship to beer and liquor licensing and so forth. And Joanna and Corey are both here, and they can help answer any specific questions if you have any about those two items. On Croak Reservoir, we had an initiative petition that commenced on June 26th, and petitions were deemed sufficient by the city clerk on August 24th. A study session was held on what we refer to as the Croak Reservoir Special Ordinance on October 1st. Promotion of a subcommittee of the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board continues. I believe to date we have not received any applications for that subcommittee, and so we'll be bringing that forward to, that city council approval probably, city council approval of that special ordinance took place in Q4 in, I believe, late October. Continuing with government policy, and a topic of discussion this evening is the Unified Development Ordinance. Several public meetings were held over the summer in Q3. The special task force met on September 18th, and a presentation was made at the Ward 4 meeting. We are on schedule for adoption within Q1 of this year. And then the sustainability plan was adopted by City Council on September 24th. Council also made a few changes to the trash ordinance, historic preservation. Right now, a focus is that the commission retained an architect to prepare an assessment and nomination paperwork for St. Stephen's Church. And Joyce, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to this?
Right now, we're still in the process of developing the plan.
Thanks. Work is underway on working with Excel on our Excel Energy franchise agreement. That agreement is set to expire on August 17th of this year. We've had several meetings internally, and we've provided comments to Excel Energy, and we'll be meeting with them probably within the next month or so. And then once we come to agreement on what the draft franchise agreement will look like, we will bring that forward for study session and then council approval before the expiration date. In terms of economic development activities, there are a lot. There's a lot of activity going on, and I'd like to thank Debbie for all of her hard work on the courts project. There is a groundbreaking scheduled for that project, and if you've driven up and down Washington Street, you can see dirt being moved, which is really exciting. There's fencing up, but Debbie was really instrumental in working with the courts and really helping them secure funding. So I just really want to thank her for all of her efforts. In terms of industrial park wayfinding program, a reevaluation of the kiosk located on Huron Street is underway. Debbie, did you want to add anything specific to this?
At Irma Drive, we've got the kiosk designed. The one on Huron specifically, there's a problem with the right-of-way in front of the Peerless Tire piece, so we may be moving it to another location. But we have applications in on many of the businesses in Irma that want to be on the kiosk, so we'll be doing that this first quarter. So there was a lot of interest in that. Hopefully by second quarter, we'll have the Huron Center industrial sign done, the wayfinding sign.
And then in terms of the marketplace, and as you can see, Phoenix Salon Suites completed tenant finishes, and we also held a tenant meeting related to transient crime prevention issues and so forth, and plans are still moving forward, probably not as quickly as we'd like them to be, but things are moving forward. Anything on that one, Debbie, that you'd like to add?
No new developments. We have been talking with the developer as late as the end of December, so things are moving forward, just moving slower than we want, so.
Thank you. In terms of the Huron Center, this is very timely, as they Save a Lot celebrated a soft opening on Saturday, and several of you attended that soft opening, and we will be celebrating the official opening this Wednesday. So we'd encourage the community to come out and check out our new Save a Lot store. The AutoZone opened in Q2, and then Arby's opened in Q2 to, and Debbie continues to work in terms of outreach to potential businesses for that Huron Center location. Carl's Farm, they are, an entitlement application is in the process. A second resubmittal is under review. As you know, the development team came in October and had an initial meeting with City Council with a $2.18 million public assistance request. And currently, we have a third-party consultant reviewing that public assistance request in preparation for the application to formally come before City Council here within the first quarter. That's not yet scheduled, though. In terms of temporary traffic calming improvements, City Council provided support for staff to move forward with the 4 designated areas that are listed on the slide. Installation began in early November, and we've been in an assessment period. And we do have presentation of that information scheduled for the February 11th City Council meeting, where we will debrief with City Council on the findings of how those are working, what's not working, what improvements we need to make, and so forth. In terms of the South Huron Street fence, currently we have 6 of 7 easements needed in order to complete this fence project. Once we have that 7th easement, we'll be able to begin the project within 7 to 10 days, and construction will take approximately 4 to 6 weeks to complete. We launched a new citizen relationship management system known as our CRM. This was launched in April, and the second bullet is a little bit more on the technical side, but that code enforcement configuration was completed in early June. I think we continue to see an increase in usage of the CRM, so we'll continue to promote and ask you to continue to promote use of the CRM system with your constituents. Yes. Mm-hmm.
That relates to those slides. The new logo looks awesome on the website, but if I access it through here, it's not there. So I don't know if that's just a quick technical piece that can be fixed. Because if I know I only access it through the app, and so it's showing there. Because it looks awesome on the website when you pull it up through a regular browser. So
Okay, thank you for that feedback. 50th anniversary celebration planning. We've had a couple of meetings with council in terms of providing the outline of activities. It's January. We're well underway in terms of celebrating our 50th anniversary. We had the presentation of the logo that you see on the slide in front of you to council, I believe, in December, and received support on that. So we're in the process of applying the logo to different uses. You did just receive an email from Kim this week asking you to change your email signature. So if you have any trouble with that, feel free to call Susan or Kim, and we'll help you get set up on that. The HEAL program initiatives, a lot of activity has taken place this year. As you can see, the HEAL program members have been very involved. They launched a Northglenn Fit Facebook group that supports meeting the CDC guidelines. We also have calendar tracking if you're not a real big Facebook user, online user. Currently, Becky Smith, our planning manager, is working through the potential opportunity to work with 9 News Health Fair to be hosted at Crossroads Church here in Northglenn, and then continuing to look at local and regional partnerships, and possibly doing a sugar pledge, which I believe that's not eating sugar, not pledging to eat more sugar, right? So then in terms of our activities related to homeless task force, a lot of work has been underway. Paulo mentioned that we've had staff members attend several of the county programs. So Paula's here as well as Amanda, and so if you have any specific questions about what's been underway on this particular operational initiative, we're happy to answer any questions, but I don't necessarily want to read each bullet to you.
Why not?
Trying to keep this meeting moving forward, Councilmember Brown. Okay, so in terms of organizational development initiatives, I'll try to go through this fairly quickly. On the topic of conversation, within my first month of coming here to the city, we spent about $750 to engage an outside consultant to come in and look at our PD sworn pay plan. And that's where we developed an approach to where we created a 7-step plan with a 6-year top out that was fit within our financial goals for 2019. Council heard a police department staffing plan, a 5-year plan that was presented with the addition of 2 new officer positions in 2019. We budgeted $35,000 in the 2019 budget to revamp the civilian compensation plan, so that way the PD plan and the civilian plans are aligned in terms of the source information that we use to develop our pay ranges. And we also included in the 2019 budget a 1% one-time stipend for maxed out employees. We don't have very many of those this year, but we had a handful. So that meaning that they would not be eligible to receive a merit increase, but now they'll receive a one-time stipend. We have 2% budgeted in 2019 for merit increases for those staff members who are eligible on the civilian side. Again, PD's on a separate step plan. And then a market adjustments have been budgeted in 2019 for civilian employees. So depending on how the market shifted for a particular position, some employees are receiving certain increases related to that. In terms of succession planning, I did make an interim role change for the Public Works Director after I became city manager, and then we posted and did a national recruitment for a Public Works Director. The position was filled in Q4 of 2018. I made the appointment of Kent Kisselman, our new Public Works Director. We also had the retirement of our former utilities manager, and that position was filled on an interim basis, and then the position was filled permanently in Q4 right before the holidays. Jason Hensel, he was an internal promotion to that position. Both individuals are doing an awesome job and really moving things forward with the city. In terms of my first year game plan that I presented to all of you during the interview process, I just wanted to make note of a few things that have been underway. We do have the work being done on updating the council appointee evaluation program, and an employee engagement survey was sent out to employees. So far we have 160 responses. I engaged National Research Center on that, and they're going to make one final push to see if they can capture a few more employees that may have been out of town or just didn't have the time before the holidays. And so I should have those results probably at this point by mid to late February, and I'll bring those back to council with an idea of how we're going to respond to those results, and those results will be shared with the leadership team, and they'll be part of identifying what steps we can take to move the needle in areas that we identify that we need to work on. The development of organizational core values, that will be something that will be kicked off here within the first quarter, and I view that the employee engagement survey is really going to be a foundational piece to helping us guide that work moving forward. And then, as I mentioned previously, the performance management program, so this is employee appraisals. This is an effort that will really be focused on in 2020. After we look at compensation, development of core values will shift into looking at updating our performance appraisal system. So moving on to performance measurement. A couple of things for you to consider on performance measurement. I would like to have a conversation with the leadership team, which I'll do here within the next month, about what we're measuring and why. I intentionally moved a lot of these performance measures to this latter part of the presentation because I really want us to take a step back and ask the question, what are we measuring and why, and then how are we using the data, even beyond presenting this data to you. And then I really want to better align how we're using the data in terms of reporting it to City Council, but connecting it to strategic planning efforts. And so I'll go through these different slides and I'll point out, I won't go through everything, so please ask me if there's something in particular that stands out to you. A couple of the things that I changed from past reports includes the Q3 column I've highlighted in green, and I've added a year-to-date total, so column, so that way you can compare year-to-date with Q3 and then 2016 and 2017. There are some areas where we don't have data, and I've noted that as no data. And for your reference, I did make a couple updates to some of the numbers. So if you have the PowerPoint from Friday, there are a few changes, and we provided this updated PowerPoint to the city clerk earlier this afternoon. So overall, we're on track in terms of how we're trending with our capital maintenance items. Are there any questions on this particular slide? I'll keep moving forward. You know, a few things that might be of interest, the tons of waste. You can see in Q3, 3,967 tons. Year-to-date total, 11,589 tons, targeting about 15,000 tons of waste, and then tons of recycling materials. You know, not quite sure if we'll meet that 1,800 mark, but looks like we're on track with that. In terms of catch basins being cleaned and proactively, and then after storm events, we're on track. And then fleet readiness is doing really well at 98%. I've added, in working with Joanna, a slide specifically on the city clerk's office. So again, this goes back to really taking a step back and asking, what are we measuring and why? And so I think by the time we get to Q4, if not into this year, you're going to see some changes, because I really want the data that we're measuring to be relevant and useful to the staff, and then better integrate it in terms of how we're reporting it to our broader community. So you can see that there were 29 QORA requests processed within Q3 for a total of 85 this year, 591 passport applications for a revenue amount of $25,607. The year-to-date total on the revenue side for that program is $93,862, which is pretty significant. And then in terms of legislative items, ordinances and resolutions, 38 during Q3, 128 year-to-date. And Joanna, is there anything you'd like to add in terms of this slide? Any questions for either of us? This is probably the most lengthy chart we have in here. Fiscally responsible government focused on parks, recreation, and culture. This is really where we're demonstrating registration levels and so forth. You can see if you look at some of the theater statistics that there's been an increase in that area. Amanda, anything that you wanted to point out?
I would just add that we do have some measures that we track annually, so you'll see some of those numbers bump up a little bit at year end, because our 3-month or 4-month registrations don't match up with 3-month quarters. So there's a few of those numbers that'll kind of see a little bump at the end of the year.
In terms of information technology, we've provided some data on overall usage of our website by sessions and visits. I'm sorry, we probably should have put slash marks, so it should be 96/202, not a comma there. And then page views, so I'll fix that. A pretty good number of page views within Q3. We track the number of email messages at 2.37 million for this year, and then the amount of spam blocked. And then CRM mobile downloads tracked at 111 for Q3, and we're at about 472. So I would anticipate to continue to see that grow as long as we make a concerted effort to promote the program, which we're doing. We added some special event information here in terms of attendance at our 3 special events: Food Truck Carnival, Pirate Fest, Magic Fest, and then we have corresponding 2018 goals, so you can see how we're trending there. We also measure the social media likes for those 3 events, and so you can see that we're seeing steady growth. I think saw a big bump with the Food Truck Carnival between 2016 and 17, and a little bit more of a bump in 2018. So we'll continue to make a good push. I think those events have been well received by community members and the broader community. I think when I was at Pirate Fest, I was talking to a couple from Longmont that drive down just to attend Pirate Fest. So we have a lot to be proud of there. In terms of communications, we produce 12 monthly connection newsletters, and so we have our 3 there up top. We measure the arrival of each newsletter each month in terms of when the post office drops it, and we've had good success there. We don't currently have any Inside Northglenn videos. We've been very focused on doing promotional videos this year, so that's something that Kim and I have been talking about in terms of what that looks like this year. And then Facebook followers, we had 3,414 Facebook followers in Q3 for a year-to-date total of 6,448. So that influence via Facebook is definitely increasing, which we want to see, as well as on Twitter. And we had 3,088 Twitter followers in Q3 of 2018 with a year-to-date of 5,920. We do track mentions and stories initiated by staff or that we find in the media. We had 17 of those in Q3 for a year-to-date total of 43. And Kim provides the links to those different mentions in the city manager bi-weekly report that we email out. I've added the total number of ward meetings to this data tracking, and in Q3 we had 2, year-to-date total 14 in 2018, and then we've added the total number of people with the mayor events, and we had 1 in Q3, and we'll add a year-to-date number there. Those evolve depending on who's serving as mayor at the time, so we'll update that. I'm sorry, there's not a year-to-date total on that column. That is my mistake. And then in terms of personnel, the turnover rate for Q3 full-time and citywide is about at 10%. And then we had 6 workers' comps claims. We do a lot to be proactive with training, seminars, and overall training. Unfortunately, there's just some areas where accidents are going to happen, but we really try to focus on making sure the preventable accidents, we do just that. From a business perspective, we provide quite a bit of data in terms of different aspects of economic development. So you can see within Q3, there were 12 business prospects, 13 new storefront businesses, 4 new home-based businesses, 1 business closure, 23 new jobs, 24,092 square feet of space absorbed, and then Debbie and her team completed 15 business retention visits, 2 ribbon cuttings, awarded 2 business improvement grants, and then 1 business utility assistance grant. And then keeping with our competitive businesses, you can see our breakdown of, on the building permitting side, we had total building permits valued at $22.5 million, and then that consisted of 783 permits within Q3, and 19 of those were non-residential, and 764 of those were residential permits, which is a really interesting statistic. And then 5 land use entitlement applications that are in process or at the end of the process within Q3. In terms of public safety measures that we've focused on, in Q3 there were 13,139 calls for service, 1,483 incident reports issued, 631 arrests, 293 accidents, and 764 municipal citations. And Chief May is here in the back. Chief, do you have anything you want to add, share with council?
If you have any questions, we did Q4, which we're not on, but we did some impact stuff there that's going to affect those numbers.
Can you come forward and speak a little
We did,
louder?
we offered overtime slots to do a marketplace initiative, and we also did school zone traffic safety. Actually, we carried that on starting in September and carried it the rest of the year. So some of those numbers will see an increase.
For neighborhood services, we track the number of cases, and for Q3 there were 905 for a year-to-date total of approximately 2,400. There were 1,332 violations, 51 of those graffiti cases, 1 abatement case, 0 citations, and 3 summonses. So wrapping up here, again, the Q4 2018 work plan I plan to present to Mayor and Council on February 11th. That's keeping with the established schedule. I am in the process of identifying a facilitator for a work session for council here in the spring. And so Susan and I will be in touch about finding a date that works for everyone for that soon. I do have 2 requests for council this evening. The first request would be if you would allow me the ability to, rather than do quarterly 4 reports this year, I keep saying next year, this year, if you'd allow a mid-year report and then an end-of-year report in 2020. That'll allow me the opportunity to work with leadership team to better work with the performance measures and really solidify what we want to report back to you. And just given the timing and the turnaround time, it's really tight, and we have a lot going on right now. So if that would be okay with you, what I would do is do the Q4 2018 report out and tee up what to expect in 2019 as it relates to the strategic plan. We'll do the strategic planning session, and then in June I'll come back and do a first part of the year report out, and then do an end of year overall annual report in January of 2020.
Is there consensus from council to honor Heather's request?
I'm good with that.
Everybody okay?
The second bullet, the strategic planning session, is that the...
What used to be known as the retreat?
Yes.
Okay, I love the new name. But also, it was in February last year. Are we pushing it into the spring?
We are partially because I started talking to facilitators back in October, and several of them were already booked for January and February. And really, I've been taking my time and really identifying a facilitator that I think will best work with a council. And so I think I'm close in balancing best individual to do the job along with affordable. There's a wide range in terms of cost when it comes to facilitators, and then really making sure we design a good agenda. So it is a little bit further out, but there's so much going on that I think we have that flexibility this year, where maybe in the past, maybe it was more pressing to have it earlier in the year. So that is it. Any questions for me? Or for directors who are with us tonight?
Questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here tonight.
Happy birthday to Kent.
And Heather, thank you. I know you put a lot of work into this.
Oh, and it's Alice. Well, thank you.
So thank you very much. Okay, we're gonna just take a quick 5-minute break, let everybody leave and everybody get organized. I gotta stand up.
Okay, everyone do it.
are. And certainly, if there are positions that you disagree with, I hope that we'll be able to have a conversation about that during a council meeting, or you are all regularly welcome at our legislative meetings. We do meet right before council meetings typically at about 6 p.m. Secondly, if there is an issue that falls outside of the guide, we will bring that issue or that piece of legislation to the full council under our agenda item and ask you all if we would like to take a position. And then we can decide at that time what that position should be. Does that still okay?
Sounds good.
Okay, great. And then the final piece was when we decide that we want to support or oppose a piece of legislation, our committee regularly will instruct our lobbyist, Jeff, to go and either talk to legislators or figure out how we can be involved in supporting or opposing that bill. And we're hoping that this year that will include testimony, whether that be by council members, by the mayor, or by staff who may be better subject experts than we are. And so I was going to recommend that so long as the bill or the issue, again, that we're looking to provide additional activity on falls within our approved issue areas, that we will simply report out to council that we're doing those things at our next, the next time that we're in front of council with the agenda item. Is that sound okay?
Okay.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Do you want to say that louder?
Yeah, or we will reach out to the council if we wanted someone to speak to it, or if their willingness to speak and testify on behalf of a piece of legislation.
Additionally, yeah, I mean, I think in the event that, you know, Mayor Dodge is not available, or staff is not available, or somebody from the legislative committee is not available, we'll send out the request to all of council, and that way one of you will be able to attend as well. Are there other areas that we needed to discuss as far as process, Heather, or Corey, or Jeff?
If I could just say, this will be my third year representing Northglenn. It's been a real honor. I love doing this, which may indicate my level of deterioration, but I really like it down at the Capitol. What I do down there is because we have one senator and one representative, I try to play large for our position at the Capitol, and I do that by insinuating myself into various coalitions involving the municipal league so that we exercise influence along the lines of Northglenn's preferences beyond our own delegation. Because as you well know, politics is a team sport. So this is something I'm going to continue to do. And all those years I spent working at the league sort of got me right into that sort of group down there. So I've continued to operate in that way. So it's been a pleasure. I love doing this.
We appreciate that you do it for us all this time.
Thank you very much. It's an honor.
Yeah, it's awesome. Thank you, Jeff, and thank you for doing the little report too on the stance about that we're taking on all the bills too.
Oh, you bet. Yeah, you'll get the dossier every week, and then a little narrative by me of what's going on in committees and what's coming up the next week, and the odds and ends.
Yep,
So.
that'll be great. Thank you. Thank you very much.
The final comment I want to make is that, when you're having these discussions about what bills we're going to take a position on in the committee, we do try and take into consideration what CML is doing and their previous position on bills, as well as what CC4CA is doing and recommending. And so we're trying to stay consistent with the spirit of some of the organizations that we're already members of. And we try to take very seriously the positions that we're taking on each piece of legislation, because we know that it does have an impact. That being said, we did review quite a few bills earlier this evening, and actually didn't take a position on any of them, and instead decided to monitor until we have more information. So I just want to say thank you to council for participating in this experiment that we're all partaking in and figuring out what the right process is. And again, I hope you all know that you are always welcome at the legislative committee, and we very much value your input.
All right, thank you. Anybody have any other questions? Legislative? No? All right, thank you. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you so much. Happy New Year, everybody.
Time. Thank you. Appreciate it. Don't leave.
They introduced 125 bills on the first day of the session. I mean, it's going to be really something this year. A lot of bills.
Good luck with that.
Thank you.
All right.
Excuse me?
Pace.
Yeah. Pace myself.
She said, what do you think the pace
Oh, what do I think the pace will be? Sorry. I thought you said pace myself. I think the pace is going to be nuts because down at the Capitol, all the bills have to be introduced by certain deadlines. Then all the bills have to be out of their first committee by another deadline just a couple of weeks later. And so that first period of the session, until we get through the first committee deadline, is just nuts. And it's inexorable because now that the Constitution limits the session to 120 days, you got to stay on the calendar. You get hopelessly behind. So it's going to be intense. Really something.
Have you met with Kyle Malika again?
I have. It's sort of been a hi, how are you in the hallway so far because things have been kind of frantic. But yeah, I've seen Faith and Kyle both. Thank you, Jenny.
Okay. And we will move to the UDO final draft. Brooke and team. No, it was just Jeff. Well, now she's asking if we want to have Corey. Okay, Heather says no. Going with that. All right, guys.
Well, great.
Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. We're happy to see you again. We're seeing a light at the end of the tunnel here, so we're getting kind of close to the end on this Unified Development Ordinance project. Clarion is here this evening as well to give you a little presentation on the adoption draft of the UDO. I would like to say a few things just before they get started, kind of more housekeeping type stuff. But basically what you're seeing here is incorporated the discussions that you had as well as Planning Commission during the consolidated draft, which was the last version that we spoke to you about. This draft is available on the city's website as well as our new Code Northglenn, the project site. I just wanted to give you a couple dates for upcoming public hearings on this process, just so that you kind of understand where we're at here. Public hearing is scheduled on January 15th. Before the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission, by charter, is responsible for providing a recommendation to council on this. So they'll hear this at public hearing and then render a recommendation. We've got this scheduled for first reading of the ordinance before you all on January 28th, and then second reading and public hearing at the February 11th meeting before you all. So. In terms of public notification to this point, what I wanted to do is point out in your staff report, there's a table we pulled together of all the kind of public meetings that we've had on this project up to this date, just so that you're kind of aware of what that public outreach looked like. Legal requirements for the public hearings themselves coming up. The actual only code requirement would be publication in the newspaper. So we are doing that. We will get the publications done. However, we are doing additional public outreach in hopes of still garnering public interest in this project and seeing if anybody has any other thoughts. That is including monthly notifications in the Connection newsletter. You've probably seen those over the past few months, as well as on the city's website. And then we also included in 4 utility billing cycles, notification to all residents who receive water and sewer bills with the city in hopes of getting that word out there. So that directs them to a certain web page. They can look there and see information about their piece of property specifically. So with that being said, I would like to go ahead and turn this over to Matt and Tarek, and they can kind of give you a brief overview as to where we're at with the adoption draft.
All right, thanks, Eric. Matt Goebel, Tarek Mafai, Clarion. Good to see you all again, Mayor, council members. Thank you all. Eric said this is a short presentation, and it is. It's going to be short and sweet. You all have been very patient and generous with your time in the past, and so we're gonna keep it at a very high level tonight. I did just want to say right before we jump in, this is an important milestone. I mean, it's easy to get kind of sucked down into the weeds of zoning, but it's a milestone project. It's a generational project that has the opportunity to really impact Northglenn in a significant way, 30, 40, 50 years down the road. So we thank you all for the opportunity to work with you on this, and I didn't want to understate the magnitude of what we've done so far. We have a project overview just to kind of get on the record a little bit of the steps that we've gone through. You all have been here along the way. We've gone through many meetings. We've heard a lot of significant public feedback. From the very beginning, when we talked with the stakeholders about what could be improved and what should get carried forward, through the drafting of the code, which we rolled out methodically through parts 1, 2, and 3. At every step along the way, we have worked with your staff to reach out to the community, to make tweaks, to make adjustments, to fine-tune the draft, so that when we get to this point, the goal has always been the adoption process is kind of anticlimactic. It's a little bit boring at this point because we've gone through all the hard stuff. And so that's really always the goal, is to get the issues addressed up front. So this is going to be smooth sailing, right, when we get to this point, we hope. We're going to roll out the consolidated draft tonight. We're going to talk specifically about the things that have changed since the adoption draft. And then you're going to hear from Eric and his colleagues about the zoning map and about the administrative manual and the various things that are coming along to support the new Unified Development Ordinance. You'll hear about those after we present the code itself. You've seen this slide before. We're finally down at that green box down in the bottom right. We're finally down to the code adoption stage. And again, we just appreciate your time and your focus as we've gone through all these steps along the way. You know how the code is organized. We're not going to go through each individual module here, each individual article, but we are going to hit the high points for each of the articles to let you know kind of what we've changed since the most recent version. Generally, what have we changed? The numbering system is new. That's actually one of the more kind of dramatic cosmetic changes to the document. Based on recommendation from the city clerk, we've changed the numbering system now, so it's going to be more consistent with the other parts of the municipal code. Not a big change at all substantively, but it just makes the document look differently. The footnotes or the cross-references change, etc. We took out all that long-winded commentary and footnotes. All those footnotes, they're really helpful during the drafting process, but we got 20 pages there. It's a shorter document because now this actually looks like what the final document will look like. We cleaned up the graphics as well. And then also there's been some clerical edits that we made. As we go through this presentation, as Tarek and I go through the substance, look for those blue squares like you see at the bottom of this slide, the page 147. That'll show you the reference to the public draft of the issue that we're talking about on that slide. So if you want to follow up in the document itself, it's that blue box. So let's go through the actual substance. And we put administration first. Just as a reminder, when we kicked this project off, this was one of the issues that stakeholders said was perhaps broken the most in Northglenn. It was inconsistent getting through the process. It was unpredictable. People didn't know what you were really looking for in terms of how to get to a project approval in the city of Northglenn. So we introduced a lot of stuff. You've heard us talk about this. We standardized the review procedures. So there's a very methodical stepped sequence of pre-application conference to application filing, etc. We introduced a new site plan procedure that I'll talk about, and also administrative adjustments, which I'll talk about in a prior slide. We improved the approval criteria for all the different types of decisions. We consolidated some of the steps that you have. Northglenn is one of the only places we'd seen this divide between permitted uses and special uses, which we're kind of trying to get at the same type of approval, and so we consolidated those into a special use permit process. We clarified the role of adjustment. It's the same people, individuals, but they actually have different roles, and this new code acknowledges those different roles and acknowledges the role of the Board of Adjustment to approve variances, which is an important legal clarification. You've got tools like this table that you see up here that summarize all the different steps. I'm not going to walk through all this, but you've got a one-stop shop. For folks that want to do development in Northglenn, they now have a clearer sense, and your staff has a clearer sense of all the different paths to different types of approvals, which is just good government. It's just clear, and all the information is in one spot. Page 147, you can see the blue box down there in your draft if you want to see that in more detail. That site plan procedure I mentioned is new. It is a clearer process. It replaces your current FDP. It's intended to be more like what other communities have for requiring an applicant to demonstrate compliance with the requirements of the code, parking requirements, landscaping requirements. The site plan is the tool that allows you all to evaluate compliance. And now you've got a distinction between the big ones and the small ones. And the big ones go to the Planning Commission. The big ones are over those thresholds there at the top of the slide. And then the minor ones are heard by the director. This is a good new progressive direction. You get the small stuff through most efficiently by having your professional planning staff handle those types of applications. But the big stuff goes to the Planning Commission. And also the director, as it says in the blue box on the side, has the ability to bump up the minor site plans for Planning Commission at his or her discretion. So site plan review is an important new tool. I mentioned the administrative adjustments. That's an important new element as well. This is some flex space, it's some wiggle room in the application of code requirements. So things like, front setbacks or things like maximum building height, you have the ability to approve minor deviations to code requirements without going through a variance process, without going through a PUD. We work in a lot of communities, Northglenn is one, that often have to go through hoops to just authorize these types of minor changes. Now you've got them in law, you've got that authorization in law, so you don't have to always, go to the PUD route or go to a variance route for that a little extra flexibility. So that's an important new step forward in the code. New to the adoption draft, these are pretty minor. We have broken apart in the procedure summary table that I mentioned a few more discrete procedure types: oil and gas permits, comprehensive site plans, wireless service facilities. They were in the prior drafts, but they weren't in the table. And so we just wanted to call your attention to the fact that they're now in that master summary table. We have carried forward a piece of your current code that had gotten left out in terms of variances. Right now, you've got an authorization for the Board of Adjustment to approve a variance for any project with a public purpose, not necessarily one that has a hardship, just meeting a public purpose. You've got that now, and we were alerted to the fact that we hadn't carried it forward, so we have introduced that back into the draft in this current draft. That's a carry forward. So I think that's all we wanted to say about procedures. It's pretty short and sweet. I think more of the interesting issues for you are in districts and uses and development standards, which Tarek will take.
Definitely more interesting.
Yeah.
Just because you're doing
Had to say it.
Had to. You left that there. Thank you, Mayor, council members, for having us back. The last part of the presentation, we're going to talk about the districts and uses, and then the quality standards is what we will end with before we get into next steps. I'm not going to read all of the information here. There's a lot to cover. You have a copy of the PowerPoint. I really just want to focus in on what are the big changes since the consolidated draft. So stop me if we move too quickly, but you also have another agenda item this evening to talk about the zoning map. So I don't want to step on Alan's shoes. Happy birthday, by the way. He's going to tell you more about the new lineup of zoning districts, how those were consolidated. We have been through this several times together as a group, but there were some consolidations. You have a lot of districts trying to achieve the same thing, so we made some cuts in ways that we thought would be efficient for Northglenn. Clear purpose statements, giving you all a better tool to make decisions on future rezonings. Revising the standards like setbacks and building heights. We've made additional tweaks to those, which I'll cover since the last draft that you saw. But then recognizing that you need a tool for exceptions, because you're not always going to have it all figured out. Somebody's going to bring a proposal forward that just requires some sort of an exception. So we've built those in as well. Oh, it's off. So there's the lineup. Again, Alan will go into greater detail about how we ended up with this list from your current list of zoning districts. A reminder that we changed graphically and visually how the page is laid out. Each district has one page, and now that the footnotes and commentary have been removed, it's a pretty short and sweet article. You can get a lot of the information in very few pages, but linking, again, those tables of dimensional standards to the graphic. And then all of that information is summarized at the end of the district's article so that you can start comparing districts to each other. And we already had an instance. We got some comments today that were pretty late in the game from somebody in the development community who said, hey, I started looking at the comparison tables. That's when I realized that there are maybe some minor tweaks that she would like to see. So this is great to finally be able to look at the districts and compare them to each other. So what is new since the consolidated draft? One is we took the height down in the manufactured home district. We had accessory structures still at 26 feet, which is really tall. And no other districts had accessory structures at that height for residential type. So we just brought those down to 16 feet to be consistent with all of the other buildings in that zoning district. The public facilities district, again, this is anything from your wastewater treatment plant to gravel storage facility, things that are necessary to take care of the city. Modified the height limit to be more consistent with the ag and industrial zoning districts. And modified the max building coverage, again, just to be consistent with industrial type facilities. Because most of the time, they're going to be that type of facility. On the flip side of that, the uses, how those relate to the zoning districts, there's a new table. That's probably the highlight of the big changes in the use regulations. You can quickly see, what use is allowed in which district, and each one of those terms is defined at the end of the UDO. And then some new and revised use-specific standards. We carried forward your recent amendments to the wireless provisions. We made some slight revisions to the home occupation standards. There are some new standards, too, for new uses like live-work. So we covered that in great detail last time. Here's another look at the table. If you're curious about that, that's on page 37. There were some minor tweaks to that. Some of the changes include the following. One is added restaurant with drive-through as just a separate type of restaurant use. Previous draft, we covered that as calling the drive-through piece of that as the accessory use. We thought it would be more clean and user-friendly to just call it what it is. It's a restaurant with a drive-through. That's different than a standalone restaurant. And something that had been left out of the use table to this point was short-term rentals. We wanted to come to you with a policy discussion, which we did, said where should these be allowed? So you now see that populated in the use table. And then we also made some changes to the single-family attached requirements. A lot of communities are talking about slot homes. We mentioned that to you last time we were here. How do we make sure we don't get slot homes in Northglenn? We did add an entrance and orientation requirement back in the building design standards to say all of those dwelling units need to face the public street. You can have some that face a courtyard as long as the ones on the end closest to the street are facing the street. We think that's a good modest standard that should prevent that from happening in Northglenn. Changes to accessory uses and structures, ADUs. We heard a lot of feedback about ADUs. Back in a couple of open houses, we heard from you all as well. How do we limit the size of ADUs? We determined with you that it was best to just limit the flat rate of 750 square feet instead of the lesser of 50% or a footprint of 750 square feet. That allows you to have a basement ADU and still be regulated in the same way that another property with a standalone ADU would be regulated. We also clarified a lot of the commercial parking, commercial vehicle parking for home occupations. A couple of citizens in particular had given us a lot of feedback on this issue and actually pointed out some errors that we had. We had cross-references to sections within your municipal code that were just wrong. And so we made those types of edits as well. Making it clear though, you can have one commercial vehicle for your home occupation and no more. We clarified that temporary use permits are required for all temporary uses and structures, and then spent a little bit of time talking with you all about mobile food vending and how you wanted to touch that. And largely the policy direction was, well, we certainly don't want to get in the way of mobile food vending. So we made a few changes here. One is that you still don't allow them in residential areas, but you would allow them in a single-family residential neighborhood with a temporary use permit. So if you're having some sort of a special event, you're not going to kick the food truck out of a block party, something like that. So we thought that was a good change. And then if you want to have a mobile food vending, a food truck in a shopping center, you just need the permission of the property owner of that shopping center so that they can work the leasing agreements out with other restaurants that might be within that same center. So that was the quick and dirty on districts and uses. The final piece is quality standards. Then we'll cover that last bullet. Oh, yeah. So this one has come up several times actually in the last year. Where do we park those mobile food trucks? And this is a problem all over the place. People who park mobile food vehicles in residential neighborhoods, they can smell, they can be loud, they can attract rodents and other pests. So we just prohibited the storage of those vehicles on residential properties, except for during a special event. Of course, it can be parked there during that special event.
And I only bring this up, folks, because one of the things we're bringing forward concurrently is, as you may recall, about a year and a half ago, we updated a lot of the nuisance regulations that also regulated public and private property, and we're actually refreshing some of the definitions and terms for special mobile equipment and tractor trailers and things that are qualified under that dovetail in with what we're talking about here, because in recent months this has become a major complaint issue that has been brought to our attention and throughout several of the wards. So just want to mention that that we are piggybacking with this effort to bolster some of those nuisance regs, because we've identified similarly testing it as it's been out as a new form and version. We've now figured out that there's some other things that we missed that we're cleaning up at the same time. So they'll be coming forward at the same time.
So the third and final piece, as we drafted the code, we started with the procedures, then we did districts and uses, and then the final piece was the development quality standards, and it covers a lot. There are several sections in there, ranging from parking, landscaping, building design, access and circulation. I'm not going to cover all of them in great detail. Again, just want to focus on some of the bigger deals that were made throughout the process. One was just being clearer about when the standards apply to what types of properties. And does the same thing apply to an infill property if it's just a small addition or expansion versus a larger addition and expansion? We introduced new low-impact development standards and built in an incentive for those standards. So it's not required to do those things, but there is a built-in incentive to reduce your parking if you're willing to go that route. Flexible alternatives. We keep talking about that flexible alternative approach. We think that's good, especially when you're rewriting a lot of new stuff for Northglenn. Developers are getting more and more creative, and they want to make sure that they can prepare an application that offers a lot of benefits to the city, even though it might not meet the exact letter of the law. So we have built in some of those avenues for flexibility. The second big bullet there was that we removed a lot of the technical standards. What you won't find in the UDO is how many copies of an application you need, how thick the sidewalk has to be as it meets the curb. A lot of those technical, administrative, and engineering standards just should live outside of this document. So you won't see them in there, and we made note of that at several points along the way.
And they do live out. A lot of those engineering standards already exist in other locations. So.
That's right. Some other highlights, I won't touch on all of these. Recognizing that low water use is important to a city in the semi-arid West. So introducing new landscaping standards that allow you to get there. Strengthening the building design standards. This was kind of a big one. Said we need to raise the bar for building design in Northglenn, but not too much that we're really getting developers to go somewhere else. So we think we have done that. We improved some lighting standards. We carried forward the sign ordinance, mostly intact, just with some minor revisions, mostly to capture new cross-references, and then just made clarifications in the subdivision standards. So what's new now since the last time that we presented that information to you? Made a few changes to the parking and loading standards, not many, but I want to give kudos to your development community. We got a lot of comments from several members of that faction of the city who said, you know, these really just don't pencil out in the world that we live in. And we took those to heart. And we took another pass at the parking requirements table. Staff did a lot of rethinking and comparing to existing developments and recent developments in Northglenn. If you remember back to last summer, we did some internal testing of the document as well. We put all of those feedback loops together and just took one more pass at the parking standards. One of those was to exempt the multifamily from those maximum parking standards. Why would you want to cap that? If people can provide more, a lot of the complaints that you get is there's not enough parking, especially for residential. For landscaping, mostly clarifications there. There was a requirement to make sure that nobody on an adjacent party or property could see a trash enclosure. Well, what if I'm on the second story? Then how do you possibly screen from that? So we just clarified that requirement. Site and building design. This is an entire new section called administration. It's on page 115. We built in an alternative equivalent compliance, that's a mouthful, which allows somebody to propose an alternative to the building design standards. It says, all right, I've got an idea here. It meets the setbacks, it meets the height requirements. I can't quite meet your building design standards, but I have something that I think offers just as good of a benefit to the community. Would you consider it? This gives you the administrative ability to consider that, provided there's an equal benefit, provided that there is no impact to adjacent properties, no additional negative impacts to adjacent properties. We think that's a good way to do this, rather than within each section of the building standard saying, well, give the director a little bit of flexibility there. We put that in one evaluation criteria up front. Another new thing here, the second bullet down, not allowing stucco to count as masonry or stone. The current code is a little bit vague there. We could argue that it does allow stucco to count for that requirement. We were clear in this latest draft that that would not count towards any 30% masonry requirement. And then we relocated some of the accessory structure design standards, which were up in the use regulations, back to the building design standards, just to make it an easier document to read. We're getting there. Site and building design continued. Some new standards in there. One of them was just preventing the barracks style development, where you see a linear approach, building after building after building. The word barracks is totally appropriate in that context. Maybe that could work, and maybe somebody might come before you and ask for that alternative compliance, but generally not a good way of doing multifamily development, just because of its relationship to the street. We went round and round about these shipping container developments and came back to it might be okay in some non-residential uses if it's integrated into the building and doesn't just look like a stack of shipping containers. So we built that provision in there as well. And then loosened some of the standards. Again, with this new alternative equivalent compliance procedure, we heard a lot from the developers. Don't tell us where our building needs to face the street, because every property is going to be different. One great example of that is if I'm on a curve, but my property has a very tiny triangle piece that touches the street. How could I possibly orient my building to satisfy all of the building design standards? There needs to be a process to consider those types of applications. So, that was short and sweet, I think. As short and sweet as we can get it. Quickly, next steps before we open it up to questions. Actually, Eric already talked about these. We'll be going to the Planning Commission before we come back to you all. And then we're collecting a lot of feedback now. I mentioned we did get some earlier comments today. We expect to get more over the next couple of weeks. A lot of those have just been clerical changes. Anything substantive would be brought back to the council if necessary for policy direction. But Eric and his team, they are placing these in an errata sheet. Call it what you will, it's a table. It's a tracking form that says, here are all of the comments we're receiving. Here's what we think we're going to do with those comments before the final draft. There will be things that you want to change, and it's still okay to strike the gavel at the end of the day, knowing that you have this errata sheet in front of you that becomes part of that process. And then the final draft would include all of the changes that are mentioned in there. So, that was a lot. Thank you for your time, and we'll entertain any questions that you have.
I wanted to talk on page 206 on bed and breakfast.
Sure.
And I realized that on page 206, it's a definition.
Oh, okay.
But I'm more concerned about the regulation. How do we regulate who's doing Airbnb and what the process is going to be? Is that going to be part of this document, or is that a separate document?
It is part of this document. So the difference is we would not call Airbnb or VRBO bed and breakfast. Those are short-term rentals in this draft. And so that is a separate line in the use table. They are basically allowed anywhere where you allow residential to occur. And so you'll see that in the single-family districts, the multifamily districts, and in the agricultural district, and in the mixed-use neighborhood district as well. They're limited. You can't do it in a mobile home. You can't do it in an RV. You cannot have an accessory dwelling unit also serve as a short-term rental. So there are some limitations. One of the bigger limitations is that you have to have a license. And the city is currently underway working on that license procedure. And so I can't really speak to exactly what that's going to look like yet, but please know that those are underway, and that would have to be in place before you could approve one of those short-term rentals.
Okay, I mean, they're happening now, of course, but how do we regulate them? How do we go back and say you need to comply? How do we find out who they are? It looks like it's...
So the applicability, I'm not sure, Eric, if you and Corey have spoken about the retroactive approach with licensing. Has that come up?
No, and I think that's something that we'll have to look at through.
Yeah, I think the licensing component is not a land use component, so it can be applied once the licensing provisions are adopted. So how you determine who's doing them is going to be kind of an evolution, but once it's in place, whether people were doing it before or start doing it after, don't need to get a license.
And I can tell you that other communities also are struggling with the same question. And my understanding is that companies like Airbnb and VRBO are now trying to collectively manage the remittance of lodging and sales tax to the municipalities, which would then probably help us build a database and a roadmap to making sure we're getting all those folks that are participating on those platforms licensed and properly permitted.
This is probably long.
It's, well, like I said, this is an evolution right now because it's very similar to like when, especially in sales and use tax, when you have like Microsoft, they sell licenses to businesses in communities, and it's sometimes very difficult to track down how many licenses were sold because then those things are actually remitted to the city for sales and use tax. And so this group of businesses are just sort of now beginning to understand the relationship that they need to have with communities like these other larger companies that are also well exercised in this process. So I think that between our licensing and what's coming down the pike in terms of them becoming more sophisticated, we're going to cover everybody that's actually participating on these platforms.
Great. Well, we'll let you guys kind of step aside. I think Alan's going to come up here. Next item on your agenda under the UDO is the zoning district map. And this is an important element of the UDO, but it's not the UDO. So it's kind of an element that will be brought forward at the same time as the UDO, separate approval process, and Alan will go into that.
Happy birthday, Alan. I bet you couldn't think of a better way to spend it, right?
Not a single one. It's Monday night anyway, right?
You start.
So what I'm going to do is kind of do a high-level walkthrough of the zoning map memo and reference some of the attachments in front of you, and then open it up for questions and discussions after that. Again, Alan Filos with the Planning and Development Department. So as we discussed in the last bit, new zoning code has new zoning districts. Once we adopt the UDO, none of those new districts are technically applied until we adopt a new zoning map. So they have to happen concurrently, otherwise the city is unzoned if it doesn't happen right at the same time. So we'll be doing that right away. We took the approach of doing it as like for like as possible. So that's kind of the overarching goal. You know, other sorts of changes can happen kind of one by one as development comes in, but we're just trying to do the equivalency right now at this point. So the current zoning code contains 21 zone districts. Only 15 of them are actually applied to the maps. That's kind of our starting spot for converting it to the new zone districts. The new UDO proposes 16 zone districts, but we only are applying 12 of them. We'll go through kind of the examples and the criteria, and then any remaining ones that aren't applied now are still available as tools in the toolbox. We've used that term before, that someone can come in and apply to. So I'll point out, so in the memo, it goes through the two criteria. So matching new districts based on kind of an equivalency table. I'll point you to attachment 3 that summarizes that pretty clearly. So it goes through the zone districts currently on the map now on the left side. On the right side, just based on like purpose statements, based on setbacks, height, different types of uses. These are the ones on the right side are the ones that line up most directly. So a lot of these were pretty straightforward. A1 agriculture is AG agriculture. O1 open space is OS open space. No changes there. There's a little bit more kind of discussions that had to be done where some of these are consolidated. Some of them we kind of targeted at the beginning. We have the single family. We've got 3 single family zones right now. Kind of all along was consolidating that a little bit since there isn't really much difference between the different single family zone districts outside of lot size, I think was the one for our 1B and C. And then the commercial zones, those got consolidated quite a bit. Right now we've got 5 on the books. They split up by very specific use, kind of starting at C0 and incrementally add on to those. And in practice, only a handful of properties were actually zoned C3 or less, so C0, 1, or 3. We consolidated all of that, and then there's a few exceptions that I'll go through here. in a second. And then another big goal of the zoning map was to remove conditional zoning. It's been an issue that has been flagged for us for quite a while, that it isn't constitutionally allowed. It's something that over the past couple of decades, through court cases, kind of at the national level, has been determined. So the city hasn't been implementing new conditional zoning in a while, but we still have 73 on the books that are technically associated with the properties. A lot of these are, they were approved when the property was rezoned. They have to do with performance of meeting a specific site plan, of specific restrictions above and beyond the base zoning, and that was the problem, was treating them differently than the base zoning. So we took the approach of removing them, kind of returning them to the equivalency, and then if there are certain circumstances where those conditions perhaps were more warranted, looking at assigning a different zone district for those. So that's where I'll draw your attention to attachment 4. So there were a handful of properties, commercial properties, that were either embedded within residential neighborhoods or right on the edge and were converted to single-family homes. Currently, they're zoned commercial. If we would have converted those to commercial general, it kind of would have opened up quite a bit to what could have been done with those properties. So while most of the commercial centers in the city, the retail centers, you know, that sort of conversion wasn't a problem. They were already basically operating as a general commercial area anyway. These ones, so there's a little cluster of commercial properties at Rosanna and Pecos, just about, across from Westview Elementary School, and then a single family converted home at each of Kennedy Drive, at Malley Drive, at East 108th, and on Melody Drive and 104th. The table goes through those. There's a little vicinity map of each one of those. Those are converted homes that are basically just office right now. Some of them have conditional zoning, some don't. We felt that the mixed-use neighborhood was the most appropriate, so these are just the fact that they're converted homes kind of shows that they're representative as a transitional nature. The mixed-use neighborhood zone was quite a bit more restrictive than commercial zones in terms of the uses allowed, and then requires a lot more of the uses require a special approval. So that just adds, that treats these ones a little more sensitively, since they're just kind of their geographic location and adjacency. Yeah.
You're obviously looking at your attachments that we have. Can you please direct me where you are?
In the attachment 4.
In the attachments.
Yeah, so that one was attachment 4. Sorry. And then attachment 3, right before that, is the summary table. So that shows all the different zone conversions that we did.
I got a little lost there. Thank you.
And then if I need to pull anything up on the computer here in terms of the zoning map, we have attachment 1 and 2 are the current and proposed zoning maps. I can pull the GIS map up here that I think Brooke demoed for you all, and we can look through that if we need to.
Just needed a road.
A couple others I want to point out is our application of public facilities zoning. So this one is brand new. There isn't an equivalent currently in the code. We wanted to do this kind of right away at the outset. It's designed for the city, it's designed for public organizations, so the fire district, the school district, rather than, you know, currently most of these properties are zoned as residential. It doesn't really make sense for their use, how they're enforced. The city can't even regulate school district properties anyway, so that one's a little bit more of a mapping exercise, just so you can identify it. So we've identified a handful of organizations. Those are summarized in attachment 5 of which ones of whose properties are being assigned as public facilities. There was just one zoning error that we caught. There's the old Rangeview Library at 104th and Huron, just north of that. It's currently split zoned between residential and commercial. It doesn't serve as a library anymore. That they use it as office and as storage. So just to make it conform with the area around it, we're recommending assigning it as commercial. And then that's really it in terms of how we convert it. So out of over 10,000 properties in the city, 7 we're recommending to go to mixed-use neighborhood, a handful of others for the public facilities, but by and large, the rest of them conform to that conversion table in attachment 30.
That's good. Can
Yes.
you say that one more time, but the changes for the old anything, because, and do they know it? Because there's some plans for them.
Okay, so they're, right now they're currently zoned as residential. It, you know, a library, I think in the current use table, we'd have to check if the, like a community use is allowed there. But instead of going to public facility, because they're not currently operating it as a public facility, we're recommending assigning it as commercial. We did notify them in terms of a targeted mailing, but have not specifically spoken with anyone or had them
Is it inappropriate for
respond.
me to ask that we notify them, because there are
We did.
conversations? Is it inappropriate for me to ask you to notify them with a call instead of a letter, only because they have some things in the works?
What do they have in the works?
Well, there was some change with the way that funding shook down since they didn't get the mill levy, but I can see that if they run again on the mill levy and they got an approval, they would see that as a studio and could potentially be public open.
So
it's a studio?
So they call it a studio. It's like their music mixing stations and that sort of thing, and it would become then open to the public. It would be a major impact to them. I realize we lettered them, but.
And that's likely that would still be allowed as a commercial, but we could absolutely reach out, be a little more proactive, understand what they're planning, and see if it makes more sense in a commercial zoning or to
I would
public
argue
zoning.
that I think the general commercial will give them more flexibility than the PF designation would.
Okay, as long as that's the case, I just don't want it to
Sure.
be an impact in which they potentially could get money and we'd lose the potential to have an asset of
Sure.
a great studio that would be open.
And I want to also point out is that I think part of this exercise that Alan's walking you through is that we did a very strenuous testing on these requested changes for these properties, because of what you're bringing up. Is that in most cases, and I think almost in every case except for maybe one, which is the auto repair over there by the Northwest Open Space, is that the zoning designations that we're giving them has greater flexibility than what they have now. But there's new standards and they have to meet those and whatnot. But we're not necessarily we're not downzoning anything as opposed to creating limitations that aren't there, that are already there. So if under their current zoning as residential, what you're describing, they probably likely wouldn't be able to do.
Got it, okay.
Yeah, they may have had to rezone it anyway. This is, if anything, being proactive and would kind of remove that step, but it would definitely be helpful to know what their plans are, since they haven't come to us yet to share plans in terms of.
They wouldn't
uses
have
or
come because
changes.
it was very contingent upon them getting funding, so that's probably why they haven't.
And that's really it. So anyway, open to questions, discussion. I'll just touch on public outreach a little bit. We included a blurb in people's utility mailings in recent cycles and future cycles, notifying them. Most of it is just a name change, but it directs people to the online website and tools to look up their addresses, find out more about their zoning in their area. We did the targeted mailings to the public facilities zones and the mixed-use neighborhood zones that I just went through before. And then the updates in the connection, the other updates that Eric went through. So that's where we're at with the project. We're taking this to Planning Commission next Tuesday, and then it is on the same schedule as the UDO for first and second reading.
Can I ask on that, kind of with the zoning districts and the mailings, how much feedback have you received, if any, from people? And is it positive? Is it, do they
That's a
understand?
great question. At this point, the utility billing has gone 2 cycles, so that's basically half of the utility bills within the city. So the next 2 weeks will cover the rest of the city. At this point, I say we've only received, I would say, a handful of phone calls.
It's been pretty minimal.
Pretty minimal. Generally supportive in terms of what we've heard. Alan and I both spoke to, I think, a couple people on the targeted list, going from, the conditional zone into the mixed neighborhood district. And both of them were just wanting more information about it. When we explained kind of what was going to happen to their property, I know the one I spoke with was supportive of it because it was going to give them a little bit more in terms of flexibility as opposed to what that condition imposed on their property rights.
Did it say that on the mailer, that it was maybe opening it up and giving them more, it did,
Yeah.
okay, because I haven't seen it, okay.
Yep.
That's good, thank you. Any other questions?
And finally, I will, the last bullet item here on your agenda is the development fee and administrative manual. So this is another element of the UDO that's going to be brought concurrently. Basically, what I want to do here is just go over really quickly what these are. You'll see them in their entirety coming up in the future. But the UDO does require that fees be established via resolution by the council. So that's in the UDO. What we've done here is prepared a fee sheet for each application type of the new UDO. And what we've done is looked kind of at our current, how we've review applications in the past. Some of them are new applications. So, we also looked at what other communities surrounding us are doing. We did look at 9 other communities around us to kind of come up with the fee table that is being proposed to you. Now, keep in mind, this won't cover all administrative costs associated with these review applications, but it does provide some review assistance and administration in each one of those development applications. Additionally, the UDO does state that the Director of Planning and Development create an administrative manual. And what this is intended to do is to outline basically the development procedures for each development application outlined in the UDO. So this administrative manual will be a kind of a compilation of all of those applications. We gave you one that's drafted right now as a site plan here as an exhibit to kind of give you an idea of what that layout will look like for those development applications. So the idea is that we provide enough information so that people understand what the application process is and what submittal requirements are and what they need to submit for a complete application to the city. The development fees will be brought to City Council as a resolution for adoption at the time of the formal adoption and the public hearing of the UDO. We'll also, there is no council action required as part of the administrative manual, but we will bring the administrative manual because I think it's an important element for you all to see as you're making your decision, basically what that administrative manual will look like and what those applications forms will look like. And other than that, that's all that I've got, unless you have any questions on either or anything else here related to the the UDO.
Last chance for questions. I see none,
Great.
so you must have done a superb job, thank you.
We're almost there.
It really does.
We have a comp plan project on the horizon, so don't be too disappointed.
Well, thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Great job.
All right, land use entitlement public hearing primer. This sounds juicy too.
Well, I'll tell you, if you guys ever wanted to have a night of planning, you got it tonight. All right. Good evening, everybody. Home stretch. We all excited? All right.
Depends how long.
So I'm going to start out by saying that
Hour, 2 hours.
I know that I'm Mr. Verbose and everybody loves hearing me talk. So, but what I want to point out tonight is that part of this is really an exercise for you to ask questions about our public process. And I want to also mention as we go through this is that this is really about you guys to stop and ask questions. There isn't a bad question to ask. What would be the biggest travesty is if there's something you didn't ask that you wanted to, because really what we're trying to do here is help you guys figure out the best approach when you're weighing a land use entitlement decision. And so when we talk about that, I'm going to break it. It's broken into, and you saw the staff memo, and I think the bullets in the staff memo really kind of touch on what we're really going to try to do here tonight is first talk about the vision and the philosophy and how, and that's really related to the comprehensive plan. And then we're going to go through the mechanics. Now, you've heard tonight with the UDO presentation some of those parts and pieces, and what we're really going to try to do tonight is really just hone in on the specifics as they relate to your public process. And really try to help you understand what goes on before, during, and after, so that you feel more comfortable about the process in and of itself, and that's the mechanical pieces. And then lastly, we're going to focus on public hearing, which is really about when the mayor reads the special public hearing announcement. She talks about the steps. We're also going to talk about some of the legalities. And when we get into a public process, which is called quasi-judicial, and Corey is going to help with that part of the conversation as well. So this is what we're going to cover tonight. And I want to also just sort of say that when you guys are thinking about whether you like or don't like something, there's two big pieces to that. And couching that perspective of what you're weighing. Does it fit with the vision, and can we technically build it? In other words, are the impacts being addressed, and does it meet the vision of the city council? Okay, and we have tools for you to help you with those two big things to weigh in on. All right, and also because Corey asked me to mention this, and we'll bring this up later on, is that staff's job is to help facilitate applicants through the process to meet the criteria. We do not direct, we do not tell the applicant that you must, shall, will do certain things. It's more of, if you choose not to do or follow our suggestions, then we may recommend differently than what you're proposing, and that you will have the opportunity to weigh that. But we do not necessarily dictate, you know, X, Y, and Z. We say, this is what the standards are. It's your job as the applicant to meet those standards. Yes. All right. Okay. So the purpose of this slide is what is a comprehensive plan? And really, for our conversation tonight, this last bullet, it's a guidance tool for you guys to make rational, reasoned decisions on land use entitlements.
And so council knows, every county and every city and town in the state of Colorado is required to have a comprehensive plan. So every community has one. It's not just, every community gets to decide their vision. And then when the developer is submitting an application, that's one of the components of the criteria that they have to meet.
So you will hear this repeated between the two of us. The comp plan is a key element to framing your conversation about whether you like or don't like a particular application. So and one of the things that we're going to talk about later on, and I'll just hit it right this moment, is I don't like it. Well, you need to articulate that in a way that says, well, this doesn't meet this criteria of the comp plan, therefore I'm going to base my decision that it doesn't satisfy this. That's what we want to try to help you with in terms of giving you some more language to use to express what your intents are. All right, yet again here, this is straight from, this is also why do we need a comprehensive plan, and yet again, it's a basis for determining land use requests. This particular slide is taken straight from the comp plan, and what we typically do as staff when we review the comp plan to a development application is we look at this last one, which is livable neighborhoods and homes, because mostly that's development related. These other criteria are basically what the council at the time had adopted as part of the formation of this, which I'll go into in a little bit in a minute here. In a minute.
Stop you with a question.
Yep.
Can you tell me, when was the last time we adopted a comprehensive plan?
2010.
Okay, and how often do we review it and make changes?
So we're supposed to do it every 5 to 7 years. And the comp plan has actually been on the planning work plan for a number of years. And actually, when I first got here, the goal was we have a good comp plan, let's do the UDO and transportation related stuff, and that took a lot longer than we had hoped. And so now we're pushing up against the comp plan, which is why we have it budgeted to start at the end of this year.
And how long do they typically take to put together?
So that's largely based on the community and what the needs and wants are at the time. I would say typically 12 to 18 months. Sometimes they can take longer. And we will actually, one of the things that we're going to come back to you before we release an RFP is what does the public engagement, what do you want it to look like? And Heather and I have talked about a little bit about this. Do you want to inform the community of what we're doing, or do you want the community to inform the process? And those have different timelines, and they also have different costs associated with them.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so here is a list of everything that you guys typically look at. I just want to make sure I'm not losing my place on my slides here. Okay, and these are the applications that you typically will see as a public hearing document. Now, I also wanted to just mention, and it was actually brought up in the slide deck for UDO, page 147 is a table that shows you who gets to make what decisions. So in addition to these here, some of these, if depending on size and scale, may actually be administrative, or they may only be planning commission, just so that you guys are aware of that. But typically, when we talk about public hearings, this is what you guys are going to see. All right. So this is basically just a precursor. This is sort of the steps that go in before we get to you. And just to kind of give you a familiarity that, you know, we have a pre-application meeting. Then we basically get an application submittal. We have to make sure that it's complete before the clock starts ticking on our turnaround times for due process, to make sure that we're giving them a process to go through. So that's really a key component. And then typically there's a back and forth, and then we schedule hearings, and then it goes before the Planning Commission or you guys. We post the public, or then we have the public hearing, and then afterwards there's a bunch of other stuff in terms of agreements, posting of securities, things of that nature that take place after we get past you. But this is kind of the overall soup to nuts, cradle to grave, what it looks like. All right, I pulled this just because this is what our current regs have for like rezoning applications. And some of the applications that we may be bringing forward, because they were in process when the old code was in place, these are the type of criteria that we'd be looking at. I only mention this because I'm going to go into the UDO criteria a little bit more to sort of show you why we sort of cleaned up this, because you'll notice that these are somewhat soft and could somewhat be ambiguous. This particular parcel of ground is indeed the correct site for the proposed development. Okay, how do you measure that? How do you say, well, no, it is or it isn't? So anyways, this is where we're at now, and you may see us come back with this, but what you're going to see is a detailed dissertation on why we think they meet them. You already see that now in our staff reports. For larger scale projects, you'll probably see a lot more detail because we're now approaching it a little bit differently with the UDO. All right, this is, once again, I'm just going to walk through high level and just kind of show you the emphasis of the applicability of the comprehensive plan and how it fits into these approval criteria. And you're going to kind of see a pattern here of, so really if I like or don't like something, it's probably best to tie it to the comprehensive plan or the UDO, because that's really where your strength is in your decision making for it to be legally defensible. Okay, once again, just showing here, it's consistent with the comp plan and the UDO, consistent with the proposed zoning district. All of these other things are very similar to the same criteria that we have now. Here's the interesting thing is that when we do plan development, we actually use those criteria and these criteria when we have a plan development, which is our currently what we call a PUD. So you have the previous criteria and this criteria all sort of labeled together to make that for you guys to consider. So for instance, it addresses a unique situation, provides substantial benefit to the city, and improvement in quality over what would have otherwise accomplished through strict application. So here's a question is where housing types, if they had used the straight zoning, could they have achieved the same type of housing types that they're now proposing? And is that something you guys want to see? So these criteria give you a little bit more teeth to where to hang your hat on in terms of how you would look at something particularly. All right. This is the platting, and here's where the technical standards become really more of the impact mitigation when we think about what type of roads do they need to build, how much water and sewer do they need to put in, what's the open space requirements. We'll also look, that's really sort of covered through the platting and subdivision process. And yet again, I just want to backstop that we still include references to the comp plan, the districts, and then we get into the meat and potatoes, which is really the engineering side of it. What I'm trying to do with this exercise is give you a level of comfort that even from the high, mid, and low level, we are thinking about all of these important things so that you guys feel more confident about when we present something to you that these have been properly vetted and that we're really staying on top of what their impact is. Final plat criteria. This is the really interesting thing with the new code. It's all those technical things we just talked about, and then we bring back conforms with what we previously said under the preliminary plat. Typically we have conditions. They must provide so much landscaping, they must have a certain amount of drainage, and essentially when we get to final, we're dotting the I's and T's at this point. All right, so
here I just want to come back with the site plan information. This is the most detailed information that you will typically see when you're considering a land use application. So this is the end game after we get through PUD and platting. Someone's going to come in and say, I'm putting this building here, here, and here, and that's when you guys get to look at it. We yet again have additional criteria that we have that goes through the same process again, because things change between, say, I'm going to show you where the grid is. This is where the tracks for the subdivision go for the homes. But then when we get into the homes, then we look at and say, okay, well, where are the homes going? Do we need easements for utilities? Things like that that may not otherwise be addressed at the higher levels. Okay, yet again, just trying to bring home the point that we are still looking at the consistency with the comprehensive plan and also with the uses that are in the district. So you have a thoughtful look on your face. You have a question? Okay.
I'm applying it to my thought
Got it.
process.
All right. Okay, so what does it mean to be in conformance with the comp plan? So it's basically this tool that you can use, and we're going to go into a little bit more, but they're basically in the comp plan. We have goals, policies, and strategies. All right. So when you're considering whether something meets the comp plan, what we typically do is we review the comp plan and say, and what we've done in the past on a staff level is we just said it meets the comp plan. What we're going to dive into a little bit here is, first, this is just a repeat of the council goals, but this is what a policy strategy looks like. And I'm not going to read all of this, but this is about high quality housing. Okay, so when we look at a multifamily or mixed-use development, one of the things we're going to say is, does it meet this particular policy statement, and does it meet these criteria? So for instance, the last one here is investigate gaps in housing market and determine locational opportunities for varying housing products that would diversify the overall housing stock. Fancy words to say they're doing the right thing in terms of integrating vertical different types of housing. Okay, so if we're looking at it and we say we don't like it, well, this could be an example where you say, I don't think they're hitting our gaps. They're not meeting our gaps, as opposed to I don't like it. So this gives you something to hang your hat on. Or conversely, you could say this is a great project. They're hitting our gaps. Okay, so that gives you a little bit more leeway in terms of how you want to think about approval considerations. All right. This is yet another example of a land use policy, and this is interesting because I bring this up because we're actually doing this one with the UDO. We've examined areas appropriate for mixed-use zoning. You heard about a couple of examples from these conditional zones that we're looking at, and I would also encourage you, and I took some post-its. I know we've run late, but when you look at if you take a look at our comp plan, this is the planning department and the ED department's playbook in terms of how we go about executing things. And if you look at what's in these goals that we have in here, we've been trying to deliver on several of them. Bike ped connectivity is identified in here, diversifying our business base, making sure that we're working with small businesses. So I mention that because as we go through this future process, you're gonna see we've checked a lot of boxes here on the comp plan. All right. So how does it get applied in the review process? Where do master plans and studies fall into this? And how can the comp plan shape the decision-making process in the public hearing? So we've covered a little bit on the first bullet. What I want to talk about the master plan is that it's a more detailed vision of what you guys want for a particular site. And currently we have a couple of amendments to the comp plan. We have the Connect Northglenn, we have the STAMP, the Stationary Master Plan for 112, and we also have Carl's Farm Master Plan. So when you think, okay, well, these general policy statements don't really get to what I'm really focused or concerned about, these master plans give a little bit more detail about what our expectations are for a particular area. And in the case of 112th and Carl's Farm, you can refer to those documents as well and say, hey, look, there's something here that's missing that I want to see, and use that as a basis because it's also part of the comp plan. So when we're talking about the public hearing and shaping the decision-making process, it's really sort of like, is it good? Does it meet our vision? That's really what we're talking about when we look at the comp plan. Is it meeting our vision? And so you as a group get to decide what that means in terms of what's stated in the plan and how that fits in today's context and where we are as a community. All right. Do I still get to talk on this one? I get to stop. All right. Corey's going to take the next couple
So I'm
slides.
going to do more than just nod. First of all, going back to the slide that Brooke was just on, I want to point out a significant difference in the criteria from the old zoning and the new UDO. The old zoning did not have compliance with the comp plan as a criteria, okay? There's a reason for that, because there's been an evolution in Colorado law. Comp plans are advisory. The statute says comp plans are required to be advisory. That doesn't prevent you from making them one of your criteria. So the new code makes the comp plan explicitly one of your criteria. Now, did the old code, could you use it to say that, for example, the reference to additional municipal service costs, could you tie it to the comp plan? Maybe, but now it's explicit that whatever the application is has to be consistent with your comp plan. So when Brooke is talking about that being the vision of the community adopted by you ultimately, it's important because it is actually an explicit criteria under the new UDO. At the council orientation, when you were drinking from a fire hose, I talked about the difference between legislative and quasi-judicial action. Well, this is the difference now in action, because you have been doing a whole bunch of legislative stuff. Every time you adopt an ordinance, the mayor opens a public hearing, and no one's here, but she opens up the public hearing on an ordinance. That's legislative. But when you're doing applications under the UDO or under the zoning regulations, that is quasi-judicial. And the reason that your evaluation has to follow the criteria is because someone in a black robe has the opportunity to look and see if you followed the criteria when you made a decision. And so if someone challenges one of your decisions, we have to show, here are the criteria, and here is how the decision maker applied the criteria to get to a certain decision. So you have these rules, you have the UDO, this massive document that sets out what the regulations are. It is the applicant's responsibility to come into you and say, here's how I'm meeting your criteria. And then you get to evaluate it against the criteria. And so I know that some of you were frustrated because you felt as if you didn't like it. You knew you didn't like it, but you didn't know why you didn't like it. And the goal of the criteria is to say, this is the way you can express whether it meets the city's criteria. And frankly, if it meets the city's criteria and you're uncomfortable, then we have to look at changing the rules, because then the rules aren't articulating what you want in your community. So it's not a matter of whether you can deny a certain application if it meets our criteria. It might mean that you got to look at the criteria. So with quasi-judicial action, it involves notice in a public hearing. That means that the folks around the property that is, whatever is the land use entitlement is, they get notice. So it's posted on the property, it's mailed, and it's in the newspaper. In the modern world, and I think over time, on the website. But notice in a public hearing in Colorado has always been notice in the newspaper. And the way this works in terms of review, and I'm going to start there and then move back. Some of the members of council that dealt with the initial medical marijuana hearings actually had this happen, where the city council denied an application for a medical marijuana license. So what happened? The entire transcript of that hearing was transcribed, sent up to the Adams County District Court. We had a proceeding in front of the Adams County District Court, and then it went all the way up to the Colorado Supreme Court. But the decision was based on the record in front of the city council. And so there were specific references to questions asked by Councilmember Whitman and then Councilmember Dodge about questions that they asked of the applicant that were related to the criteria. And I was able to use those in the argument to say, this is why the city was right. And we won. And we won because we had a good record. And so the record at a public hearing is the staff report. It is everyone testifying. It is the questions you ask during the public hearing. And then a court doesn't decide whether you were right. That's not the role of the court. The role of the court is to look at what you did and say, is there evidence in the record that you all could hang your hat on to make your decision? So not whether it was right or wrong, but simply whether the court can see how you got to your decision. And that's an important difference. They're not second guessing your decision. They are looking at whether there's evidence in the record that says, okay, I see how the council got there. So when Brooke is talking about criteria and objectivity as opposed to subjectivity, it's critical because then the court can say, oh, you need 10 parking spaces and this only provided 6. And that's obviously an easy example, but it's those type of things that if we're doing our job, you're going to have a staff report that says, here's how they meet the criteria. Or in some cases, here's how they're trying to meet the criteria. You have an issue to decide because they are pushing the envelope.
And I want to just say that from my working relationship here with this organization is that we've always tried to get to a place when we come to public hearing with you that the ladder that Corey just referred to isn't in play necessarily. So typically what we try to do is resolve the technical criteria, all the criteria requirements to a point where there's less ambiguity or questions of whether or not there's an envelope being pushed. So in that sense, we've tried to make it easy for you to make a decision, but that may not always be the case.
So this is what you heard in the orientation, so I'm going to be much more brief. Because the review of your decision is a review of the record, everything that went into your decision-making process has to be in the record. Otherwise, if there are things that are kind of implicit, but you're reading the words and you don't know what happened, you've got a problem. So there's 3 types of things that we typically identify as problematic. The first is ex parte contacts. Again, that is someone contacting you outside of the public hearing process and having a conversation with you that no one else knows about. So I think the example I typically use in my orientation, and this is more prevalent in small towns, the post office is the center of the universe. And so everyone meets at the post office to get their mail, including council members. And typically that's the place where a citizen will come up to the council member and say, you can't approve that application. Under no circumstances can you approve that application. And that conversation's had with one individual, not the 9 of you. That's an improper ex parte contact. At the same time, you are all public figures. People know that you're on council. People know that you might be making a decision. I'm going to use this example in two respects. Let's say that a super Walmart was proposed in Northglenn. Super Walmarts are always controversial. It is customary for people to find you on the street and say, whatever you do, don't approve that super Walmart. Well, again, that's actually an improper ex parte contact. And you can't always avoid them. You can say, you need to come to the public hearing. I can't talk to you. And you know what? In most cases, they're going to still talk to you. You may get a letter. You may get an email now that says, whatever you do, don't approve that Walmart. Well, the harm of an ex parte contact is that you have information that both the rest of the council doesn't have and that the applicant doesn't know about. So while it's not a perfect solution, if someone contacts you outside the public hearing context, share it. Say, I tried to avoid it, but council should know, the applicant should know that I was approached by a gentleman who said, don't approve the Walmart. I told him to show up at the public hearing. He doesn't appear to be here, but that was the extent of the conversation. You've cured the fact that now the other 8 council members know exactly what you heard.
And let me just add a couple of examples that I've seen here in Northglenn over the years. Oh, one of my constituents couldn't make it tonight, but they wanted me to pass along this commentary. So I think that's yet another example of something that has happened here, at least, moreover, that I've seen more than the post office example. So just something to keep in mind, where really what you're trying to do is to disclose, by the way, someone approached me, this is what they said. I want everybody to know that I'm sharing what was said so that you all have the same information.
And then the second item, carrying the Walmart analogy, because Sursa does a video that I think you have all seen where they talk about the big box retailer, and we don't know who that is. And someone is elected on the idea that no matter what, I will never approve an application of that type. So what have they done? They've engaged in what's known as prejudgment. They are not an objective decision maker under that context. They're not applying the criteria to whatever the application is in front of them. That disqualifies you as a decision maker. Now, in the liquor context, and I know this is about land use, but in the liquor context, there's actually a statute that says if you have an abhorrence to alcohol, you can't decide a liquor application, because the idea is you've prejudged it. If you have an abhorrence to alcohol, you're never going to approve a liquor license. Well, frankly, if you have an abhorrence to Walmart, you can't consider a Walmart application. It's the same idea, because you've engaged in prejudgment. So the message is you have to consider each application on its merits. You have to consider that application based on what is presented to you in the public hearing context, and make a decision based on the criteria.
So just to add some color to this, is because I've worked over many small communities, is that there have been council members who in open, like when you guys have your circle, when you make your comments, go, you know, this community's character is not going to change. It's going to stay the same. And it's never going to be anything other than what we have. And by God, I'm going to die on a hill before I let anything do to change that. Now, if you're an applicant and you're coming in and that person is saying something like that, that would suggest that they have prejudgment towards something that may not necessarily align with their thing. And so we'll get into what happens when you've maybe said something like that in the past and potentially is brought up in a public hearing.
So the third issue is one related to conflicts of interest. Northglenn has a unique provision in its charter that is much more narrow than most other communities in Colorado related to conflicts of interest. So section 4.7 of the city charter says, and I'm just reading a portion of it, no member of the council shall vote on any question in which he has a substantial personal or financial interest other than the common public interest, or on any question concerning his own conduct, and in said instances the member shall disclose the interests of the council. On all other questions, each member who is present shall vote when his name is called. And I understand the gender language in the charter is problematic, but it's there. In other words, if there is no personal or financial interest, or it's not about your own conduct, you have to vote. And in general, conflicts of interest are broader in other communities, but in Northglenn, it is very specific, and it is, again, substantial personal or financial interest. That's what defines a conflict of interest. Are you going to be making money or having some benefit? In that case, you have a conflict. If not, you may have the appearance of a conflict, but under our charter, it's not a conflict. So what does that mean for all of you? Because it puts you in a very difficult position, because what I typically advise my clients is, if you don't want to read about this on the front page of the newspaper, if you would be embarrassed if you read about this on the front page of the newspaper, you probably have a conflict, or you at least need to disclose. In Northglenn, I would suggest it's half of that. which is if you don't have a personal or financial interest, but you feel like there might be a perception that there's a problem, disclose. Disclosure is always, always appropriate.
If you disclose, can you vote?
Yes, because you only can't vote if you have a personal or financial interest under section 4.7. So absolutely you can vote. And what it does,
I don't understand that.
so you can't vote if you have a substantial personal or financial interest. That is a,
Even if you say, I
correct,
have a personal
correct.
interest.
That is a disqualifying conflict of interest, yes. But on all other matters, I would absolutely recommend disclosure. And the reason I recommend that is because the harm of a conflict of interest is this idea that you have bias. And if you disclose at the front end, I know that this looks like I have an appearance of bias. Here is the issue. I do not have a substantial personal or financial interest, and I am here to tell you, council, and I'm here to tell you, public, that I am able to decide on this based on the facts in front of me and apply the criteria without bias. And it puts that mystery that everyone is thinking, well, it's public, and it's made part of the record. And the harm of this idea that it's not a pure process is mitigated as much as it can be. So what is a prohibited conflict of interest? Again, Brooke added these words and I like it. It is the financial profit, it is show me the money, it is familiar relationships, but again, this is on quasi-judicial matters. So this is when you have an application, applying a land use application to a given set of criteria.
And I think the one thing here, the reason why we're bringing this up between the charter, and a lot of this stuff is taken from what is the typical training exercises that they do statewide in terms of that. So I think it's important because what you're seeing here is that there's a higher filter than what is prescribed in the charter. And so there's this other question for you all, is that in terms of trying to provide transparency and and representing it as best a due process as possible, that there's these other considerations that you can take into account, but that from a defensible standpoint, if you ain't getting paid and you're not making a financial benefit, you can still act on this, but there's other considerations that you may want to take into account just for transparency. Fair enough?
Yes. Okay. And so typically, if you are applying, if you have a legislative matter, the hours of a pawn shop, and you're a pawn shop owner, you can vote on that because it's legislative. It applies to every pawn shop in the city. So that's sort of the difference between legislative and quasi-judicial in that context. If you do have a conflict, the issue is not only can you not vote, but you also can't influence others who are voting. So the recommendation, if you have a conflict, a disqualifying conflict, is not only do you disclose the conflict, but you physically remove yourself. You step down and either walk out of the council chambers, go in the back of the council chambers. If you go in the back, no sign language. But the idea is you can't influence others. It is a complete disqualification. Rare, but it sometimes happens.
And I go ahead.
Do you have to self-identify?
Yes.
If you choose not to, can someone call you out?
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, only the individual council member in a quasi-judicial matter can disclose that conflict. But it is good practice if council believes there is a conflict to at least ask the question. Even the discussion, again, going back to my previous point, is healthy. Because if there is a question about a conflict, why not have the discussion?
Oh, yeah, I'm with you.
So,
yeah, and all I wanted to add is that I've actually seen elected officials or plan commission members, I have a conflict, and then sit literally in the front row of the meeting, not saying a word.
Right.
like giving the evil eye to everyone on that, making it as uncomfortable as possible. So yet again, it's a question of whether or not there's due process and whether or not this person's unduly influencing. I mean, you'd be surprised, it happens. And so this isn't just to say, yeah, you know, this is best practice. It's like we have collectively seen things like this occur in many, many, many places. So,
And Brooke mentioned due process. What that means in this context is a fair and impartial hearing. And so that's why this is all about fairness, it's all about impartiality. If you provide a fair and impartial hearing to an applicant and you apply the criteria to an application, I can defend that decision every time, no matter what it is.
right. And this, I just want to bring back the point, this is all about what we can do to make it the most legally defensible decision that you guys have. And so these things are all factors into that.
So I think I have covered most of this. The one thing I would focus on is it's appropriate to ask questions, but the question should be pertinent to the issues to be decided. If you don't have a regulation regarding color, saying I don't like your blue building is inappropriate.
It's fluorescent colors. We covered that in the video.
Okay.
But thank you for bringing that up, Corey.
I had no idea. Glad I could walk into that. But those are the types of things that are, if there's not the language there, it may be bad style, but if you don't have the criteria, you can't ask it.
All right. Any questions so far on any of this? All right. So moving on, I'm going to talk a little bit now about the process, and this is basically taken straight from the mayor's script that she reads. And so I'm not going to go through all the steps here, but once again, I think what's important here is when to ask questions, and then after you've closed the public hearing, you guys then typically will make a motion either for or against. And there's strategies to that as well to think about when we talk about this. And then you still have questions to ask. There's still clarifications and things. And so just kind of want to walk through this just so that you all are familiar. Yet again, you've heard it, now you're seeing it. This is what I also wanted to share with you. And really, I'm not going to read any of these slides, but I will say what the express intent here is that this is what we communicate to the applicant through the code of what to expect for a process, so that you guys understand where they're coming from and what they expect, because this is what we've prescribed in our process, so that they know what's applicable. And so that's really what these are for, intended to do, is really just to sort of let them know that this is how you guys act and what you act on. So it's really trying to, just so that you understand the transparency side before they even come to you. All right.
Let me, probably 95% of your public hearings are going to be fairly perfunctory and non-controversial. But there will be times when they are difficult and controversial, and you may have a full house. And so in those circumstances, deliberation is critical. Deliberation is critical for a couple of reasons. Sometimes you may not have made your decision up after hearing the evidence, and a discussion amongst the 9 of you is, true deliberation. Oftentimes, you've heard a lot of information and are not sure whether or not or how the criteria have been met. Even with staff making a recommendation, you can question it and say, I'm not sure how that works. Well, in a particularly controversial land use application, you always have the ability to get to your decision, whatever it might be, and then ask that findings be made and brought back to the next hearing for you to approve. Why is that important? It's important because it gives staff an opportunity to listen to the discussion and kind of take all the pieces that you were talking about and put it into an orderly decision that you can then approve at the next meeting. And I go back to the marijuana application, that's exactly what happened. And those findings that the city council approved were the basis for the Supreme Court's decision that said, yeah, they did it right. But we would not have been able to do that on the fly. We had the couple weeks to listen to the tape and put it together and come back and say, council, as the decision makers, this is what we heard. Did we get it right? Is this the basis for your decision? The other thing I want to point out that is, again, unique to Northglenn, I believe the deliberation and having that deliberation in public is helpful because everyone sees how you're getting to your decision, how you're applying your criteria. However, Northglenn has a provision in its charter that allows deliberation in executive session. In most cases, I would recommend against that. But if there is, for example, a question that you all have, a legal issue that causes you concern, that you need guidance on, you do have the ability to go into executive session, get direction if you need it, and come back out. I would say that is definitely the exception and not the rule. But there may be unique circumstances where you have that tool, and that is a tool that is unique to Northglenn's charter. Unless you have that in your charter as a home rule municipality, state law would not allow you to go into executive session for that purpose. So that's why I say it's an exception. Use it sparingly, if at all, but it's a tool that's there.
And so what I'll add to that is, you know, a lot of times when you guys ask questions, we typically try to anticipate what those are and to inform you that we've thought of it and it's actually been addressed in the application. There's possibilities down the road where maybe there wasn't something we thought of that you guys want us to consider that you want to have added. And I think what Corey's trying to say here is that you don't necessarily have to try to figure it out that night, but what we would try to do is facilitate a conversation to better understand and get an articulation of what exactly it is that you want for an approval to be added as a condition. And then we can come back at the following meeting and present that to you and say, is this exactly what you guys said? So I think another thing is I'm only mentioning this because, as Corey was alluding to, most of our approval processes have been fairly straightforward and perfunctory, where there's not a whole lot of conversation. It's pretty straightforward. It's a small scale project. There's not a lot of controversial issues. I think the biggest conversation that we've had since I've been here was the queue line for the Starbucks over on 104th. And the concerns about whether or not the technical memorandum that was provided was satisfactory to appease the concerns of traffic impact. So those are the types of things where it's like, you're like, hey, wait, hold on, we need more information. You have the ability to ask for that. And so that's really what we're trying to emphasize here with this. Okay. So the other part of this is really just sort of to open this up about what your feelings are about deliberation and about when you say, hey, I don't like something. And so this is really more of a time for us to stop talking and for you guys to ask some questions about, you know, I don't like something like X. And you can say whatever it is. And then we can try to help better understand, you know, what does that really look like in terms of translating that into either how does that meet the criteria, whether it's part of the comp plan, part of the standard, the technical standards, things of that nature.
And I want to address one thing on this slide because during the UDO discussion, Alan referenced the whole idea about conditional zoning. I want to differentiate between conditional zoning and putting a condition on an approval because they are two different things. Conditional zoning, which is not allowed in Colorado, means that if you don't meet a condition, the property no longer has zoning. So you have a condition, and at some point in the future, the condition isn't met, the property's not zoned anymore. That you can't do. However, you can say, an approval that says, if you fix X, have a lower height, lower building height. If you reduce the building height to 25 feet, it's approved. If that building height isn't lowered, it's the existing zoning that's in place. You don't lose zoning. So the approval only happens if the condition is met, as opposed to a condition later being not met and the property ended up being not zoned at all. So there may be circumstances where you can impose conditions. If the conditions aren't met, the zoning isn't approved. but the property is still zoned because the previous zoning is still in place.
You guys still with us? Still? Okay. So, Corey, I'm going to throw out a scenario here for you guys to think about for a second. Is that when you're taking into account an application, it's a controversial one. Do you make a motion to deny or do you make a motion to approve? So there's a couple different schools of thought. If you make the motion to approve and you get the second and the motion fails, that has potential outcomes and impacts versus a motion to deny. And so can you elaborate a little bit on that and some of the strategy behind that?
Well, and I would rather have a motion that passes. So what I mean by that is if the council's inclination is to deny it, make a motion to deny. Because then we can create a better record to support that motion, because you have heard all this evidence, and we should know why that motion is being made based on what's happened to that point. Whereas if you make a motion to approve that fails, it's much more difficult for us to articulate why it didn't pass.
Can I clarify that?
Mhm.
So, from my observation, we seem to motion to approve instantly, right after the title of whatever is stated.
And I think
That
you're,
seems to be the habit that we're in.
and I think that's correct, but I think those are largely legislative matters.
Okay.
And so we'll know when we're doing a quasi-judicial matter and we have the packed house. And that's why we're having this discussion, is because it is a unique circumstance. But you're absolutely right. This is going to be on a quasi-judicial matter that is with a heightened sensitivity.
Well, I guess I get confused, to be honest, because there have been a couple times anyway where it automatically is motion to approve, second, then there's a discussion, and there have been times where we've backed out of that.
But those are legislative as opposed to
And
quasi.
is the process still
Yeah,
the
because
same?
I don't care about my record on a legislative matter at all.
Okay.
If an ordinance fails that is legislative, it fails. And I don't have to go defend it because it was legislative.
Got it.
And so on this slide here, rolling back a few, it's the last two bullets. We close the public hearing. You can still ask staff and applicant questions. Then the council can take action. That would be the making of the motion. So I think this is the distinction that you're looking for. Okay. And once again, that's why I wanted to sort of, you hear it when you're at the public hearing, but seeing it and knowing it helps sort of make it more meaningful. So on this last slide, I guess the other thing here is I want to throw out there, I want to approve it, but not as submitted.
Well, glass half full, glass half empty.
Right.
If there is a significant issue with an application can always be continued. And so if an applicant sees that light at the end of the tunnel is an oncoming train, and they understand where the council, based on the questions, is coming from, that they can mid-hearing say, we're going to ask for a continuance. And that's something certainly you can honor, where they can go back to the drawing board and say, okay, we heard the concerns, we understand why you think we're not meeting these given criteria, we can go back and try to fix it and come back. And so I think that's the most common, I want to approve it, but not as submitted. But we still have to hang our hat on criteria.
Right, and I think the other part here then is if you're making conditions of approval, for instance, there's not enough trees that satisfies the requirement. I want to see more parking on this portion of the project because there's going to be a different type of commercial activity. Those are the types of things where you can also look at, as long as they're within our criteria and our standards that we have in terms of how much parking is allowed. Another good question here is, and this is one that we will likely see as a conversation with multifamily, and you heard that we took the cap off of multifamily. Well, industry standard over the last 5 to 7 years is that you need about 1.2 to 1.5 spaces per unit. And what we're seeing is because millennials and the increased housing prices here in the Denver metro market is that formula isn't working properly anymore, because you may have a one-bedroom studio, or a one-bedroom or studio, but you have 4 people living in it because it's so expensive. That means those are 4 people, not millennials who, by the way, take the little razors around and everything, which is awesome. But also, more importantly, it's like the other multimodal transportation opportunities may not offset that impact. But yet again, this is something where you as the council can say, I don't think there's enough parking here to serve what you're proposing, and we think there should be more based off of our criteria. So I think that's really what we're trying to get you to be thinking about, is that, you know, a lot of times we will address saying they met the parking requirements, but you may say, hey, I don't think that there's enough parking here, because I've seen this type of use before, and if you see it, they park down the street because there's not enough parking. A great example is not a parking issue, but in the past has been Santiago over on 104th, where even though it's a double thing, it queues all the way out into the street. So those are the types of things where there's latitude to consider some of those things. So once again, this last bullet here is translate expectations into concrete requirements. And what we're talking about, the comp plan criteria, the technical requirements. If someone's asking for a waiver of a standard or a deviation of it, that doesn't mean you have to accept it. You can still say, nah, we want 1.5, we don't want 1.2.
And I want to make one last clarification. It is not an ex parte contact to reach out to Brooke or reach out to me if you have questions on the materials that are provided to you. We are your staff. We are still there to help you. It's comments from the public. So that's an important distinction, because if you see something and you say, I don't get it, it's a lot easier to reach out to us in advance, because we might have missed something. Ask the question so we can clarify it and make sure that you are comfortable with the materials you have to consider at the public hearing.
And on the financial interest thing, I want to just share one last example that I had to deal with a long time ago. I had a planning commission member who lived across the street from a development and came to me and basically said, I hate this project. It is going to ruin my property value, and I cannot support this request. And that person did not disclose it to the commission and did not disclose it to the chair prior to the meeting, and proceeded to act in a manner that was absolutely adversarial and hostile toward the applicant throughout the entire process. The point in this is that just because the developer isn't paying you per se, that if there is the perception that perhaps you feel like you may either adversely or positively benefit, it's not necessarily just the positive, it can also be the negative. And so once again, that's more of a subjective, moral, ethical, philosophical aspect as it relates to our signature. So just want to share that, because I kid you not, this stuff actually does happen, and I've seen it in my career here more times than I care to mention.
But
never, actually, truly, never in Northglenn. And I point out that one of the great examples was Wayne on the licensing. He removed himself for the licensing hearing because of the very reasons that we're talking about.
That's all we got.
It was a really good show.
Do I ask if there's
enjoy you guys
questions on
working together. Kind of like a little Mutt and Jeff thing going on. I really did. I'm not going to tell you which one you are, Corey.
How about Abbott and Costello, Dean Martin, Jerry Lewis?
Fred and Ginger.
Fred and Ginger. Oh, there you go.
There it was, right there.
Lucy and Ricky. I mean,
Yeah, I think more.
All right.
All right, so there's no questions for these guys on?
If something comes up after this, please, by all means, once again, we just want to make you guys feel confident about the process, empowered in making a decision, and keep in mind that if you're not certain whether it's appropriate or not, that's what we'll be there for during the public hearing. So don't be afraid to ask that question as well.
I think that's my question for you right now, is I know that this is a broader scope than just what we're gonna go through in the next couple of weeks, but do you anticipate that we will have attendance when we're bringing this forward?
I will tell you that we actually, I am surprised at for the UDO you're referring to.
Yes.
I am actually surprised because we actually have a script and everything for all the staff, because we were expecting to at least get 5 to 15 calls a day. And I think, in talking with all of them, I think we've had maybe 4 or 5 inquiries on call-ins, and then we've had, I think, 1 or 2 on the direct mails that we've had. And once again, it was clarification and trying to understand what we're doing. So overall, I think, we've done a great job of messaging it. It's also very unexciting, as you guys have had to endure to a certain extent. But it's also really like they were saying, this is a once-in-a-generation thing. So.
Wow, thanks for letting us participate in that once in a generation.
Thank you very much. I think we're all experts now on how to conduct ourselves in quasi-judicial. Yeah, exactly.
We'll try to make you proud, Corey.
All right. And do you have anything for the good of the order tonight?
Not anything other than just a reminder that the Save-A-Lot ribbon cutting is Wednesday morning, 8:45 at Save-A-Lot. Hope to see you there.
Okay, thank you. We are adjourned.
Thank you very much, folks.
I'm gonna stick with Mutton Jeff.
We were